The last thing I felt was the ground disappearing beneath my boots. 1 second I was on the trail. The next, I was in open air. There was no time to scream, no time to think, just the sky spinning above me and the cliff face rushing past and a blur of gray stone. My name is Ethan Cole, 26 years old, a guy who loved mountains, hated alarm clocks, and had exactly one plan for the rest of his life. That plan had a name. Her name was Mia, and in 3 weeks, she was supposed to become my wife in a small ceremony by the lake. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond. She had picked it out herself and pretended she hadn't. I was supposed to call her from the summit, reach the top, call Mia, hear her laugh, come back down in time for dinner. That call never happened. The dinner never happened. The wedding by the lake never happened. And I never came back down the mountain. Instead, I fell. And then for a while, there was nothing at all. No darkness, no light, just the complete and total absence of everything. They found my phone at the base of the cliff 2 days later. The screen was cracked in 3 places, but somehow it still turned on. Mia had called 47 times. I know this because somehow, in ways I still cannot explain fully, I could see the screen from a distance, not with human eyes. I didn't have those anymore. What I had was something much closer to the ground, and much more confused about everything. I was a dog, small, dirty, shivering on a cold mountainside with 4 legs that I had absolutely no idea how to properly operate. No collar, no name, no instincts that made any sense. My human brain was still fully intact inside a body built for entirely different purposes. But I remembered her. That was the one thing the universe, or whatever, had done this to me, had decided to leave completely untouched. I remembered Mia's face, the specific way her eyes went soft when she was trying not to smile at something she found funnier than she wanted to admit. I remembered her laugh, the sound of it in a quiet room, the way it started small and then took over completely, like she couldn't stop it once it started. I remembered her hands, the way she held a coffee cup with both palms like it was something precious and the morning deserved to be taken seriously. I remembered the ring in my pocket, the pocket that was now somewhere at the base of a cliff with a body that no longer belonged to me, and somewhere deep inside the small, confused, 4-legged body, something ignited that not grief. The grief was there, not fear, though fear was everywhere. Something older than both of those things. Something that didn't have a name in any language I knew but felt like a compass needle swinging hard toward a single point. Her street, her building, the blue door she always said needed a new coat of paint. That was my north now. That was everything I had left. I was going to find Mia. I had no plan, no map, no thumbs, and no idea how far I had to go. But I was going to find her. Whatever this world had turned me into, whatever was happening inside this body, it was not going to stop me from getting back to her. The first night was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. The cold came fast once the sun dropped behind the ridge above me. My human brain kept reaching for things that weren't there. A jacket, a lighter day tent, the 100 small comforts that used to make cold manageable. There was none of that. Just the open mountain and the wind moving hard through the pines and a body that had no idea what it was doing. I found a fallen tree near the base of a granite outcrop and curled underneath it the way I had seen dogs sleep in photographs. It was nothing like photographs. My legs went in the wrong directions. My nose kept pressing into the dirt. I sneezed for times in a row, but eventually, exhausted in a way that went deeper than any muscle, I stopped fighting the body and let it do what bodies do when cold and scared. I slept badly, waking every hour to sounds in the trees, my heart hammering in a chest that was much smaller than I was used to living inside. Somewhere in those long cold hours, I let myself think about Mia properly, about what she was doing right now. In the dark, without any word from me, she would have called Derek too. Derek Walsh, my best friend since we were 14, the guy who had talked me into this hike with a week of enthusiasm. He had been ahead of me on the trail. I had seen his hand reach back toward me in the second before everything went wrong and the path gave way. I didn't know if he had made it. I didn't know if he was alive, or if he was gone the same quiet way I was gone, with no explanation and no goodbye. The not knowing sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down, heavy and cold and completely impossible to set aside no matter how hard I tried. I made myself stop. I made myself breathe slowly, the way Mia had taught me once during a bad anxiety spiral in a parking garage 2 years ago. Stay in the moment, she had said, one thing at a time. I had thought it was simple advice. Standing on that mountain, I understood how hard it actually was. One thing at a time. Find the road, find a town, find a way east. That was the whole plan. broken into pieces small enough to carry in the small chest. I pressed my nose against the cold bark of the fallen tree and focused on the smell of pine sap and frost and the distant suggestion of wood smoke. And I told myself the one thing that made any of this survivable. I am still here. I am still moving. I am still going to find my way back to her. The second morning arrived slowly, the pale light coming in low through the pine canopy above while my legs rediscovered what legs were supposed to do. I tried to stand. My legs buckled immediately, and I sat back down in the pine needles with what I can only describe as total and dignified surprise. The second attempt went better. The third was almost functional. By the time I reached the end of the fallen tree, something in the motion had started to click. Not just the legs, something deeper than the legs. A shift inside my chest, like a gear I didn't know existed quietly settling into a slot it had always been meant for. I didn't understand it. I filed it away and focused on the descent because there was a road somewhere below this mountain and I needed to reach it today. The trail I had hiked up with Derek was somewhere to the west, and I had no real way of knowing which direction led down the fastest from where I was. I followed my nose. That sounds ridiculous, and I was aware of how ridiculous it sounded even as I was doing it. But it was the most reliable tool I had. Toward the valley, the air smelled like soil and running water and the faint diesel trace of a highway. I followed that smell and let it pull me down. The descent took most of the morning. The terrain was difficult in places, loose shale and narrow ledges that required more concentration than I had to spare. It was somewhere around midday when I finally reached the tree line and found myself at the edge of a rocky slope looking down at the valley below. And something extraordinary happened. The road at the base of the mountain appeared in my vision not as a distant blur, but with perfect, impossible clarity. A red truck on the gravel shoulder, license plate starting with the number 7. A woman in a yellow jacket standing by the passenger door reading her phone. She was at least 3 miles away. I could see the expression on her face. Mild frustration, then a small smile. No human eyes could see what I was seeing. I held the vision and let it run. I watched the truck pull back onto the road and head north. I tracked it until it disappeared around a bend in the highway. Then I looked away, and the distance returned to normal, and I stood at the edge of the tree line, breathing hard for reasons that had nothing to do with the climb. Something was growing in me. Something the second life was building piece by piece without asking permission or explaining what it was building toward. I didn't know what I was becoming, but I was beginning to understand that whatever it was not ordinary, not even by the standards of being a dead man in a dog's body. It took the rest of the afternoon to reach the valley floor. The terrain leveled out into dry grass and loose gravel and old fence posts leaning at tired angles. My paws were in bad shape. The rocky slope had done real damage. A sharp, insistent sting into places on my front feet that I had been ignoring since the shale. I stopped and examined the situation. 2 cuts, one on each front paw, bleeding slowly onto the pale gravel of the road shoulder. Worse than I had realized. I sat down and did the only thing that seemed available, licked the wounds the way animals do, more out of logic than instinct, and waited to see what happened. What happened was that the cuts began to close. Not quickly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The edges drawing together the way a zipper closes, slow and steady. The wounds sealed themselves completely while I sat on the roadside watching. Then the thin pink lines faded, and then there was nothing there at all. I stared at my own paws for a long time, past looking at them, into what the fact of them meant, into what the vision and this and the gear click in my chest all added up to. Something was accumulating inside me, some kind of capacity that this second existence was feeding without my knowledge, building towards something I couldn't see yet. I was not the kind of person who believed in this sort of thing. I was a structural engineer. I believed in load calculations and physical law and things you could measure. And yet here I was, a dead man in a dog's body, watching cuts seal themselves on a road shoulder, reconsidering everything I thought I understood about the world. I stood up. The pause felt fine, better than fine, stronger than before the cuts, as if the healing had left something additional behind in the process of closing. I filed it away with everything else and started walking, because there was a gas station smell coming from around the next bend and my stomach had opinions. The gas station was small, 2 pumps, a hand-painted sign, and the particular smell of a refrigeration unit working to harden cooling autumn air. I smelled the hot food from a quarter mile away and my body responded with a sound I would generously describe as urgent. The body had priorities I couldn't override. I stood at the edge of the parking lot for a moment and considered my options. Small dog. No money. No way to explain the situation in any language anyone would understand. What I had was a face that apparently communicated something people found difficult to walk past, and a willingness to wait for however long waiting took. I walked to the door and sat beside it and waited. Not a sophisticated plan, but it was what I had, and it had the advantage of being executable immediately. The man behind the counter didn't notice me when I slipped inside. He was watching something on his phone, laughing at a private joke with his whole face. I made my way to the corner near the refrigerators and sat down and waited. Waiting, I was learning, was something this body was much better suited to than my human one. 8 minutes later, the door opened and a little girl walked in ahead of her father. She was maybe 7, with dark braids and a green coat and bright alert eyes. She saw me in the first half second. Children are not yet trained out of noticing things, and what she noticed completely and without reservation. Her face went through what I estimated to be 7 distinct emotional states in roughly 2 seconds, ending conclusively and permanently on something close to pure joy. Her father was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with a tired face, and the posture of someone whose day had not previously included this development. He looked at me. I looked at him. A brief negotiation happened in his expression between the practical side of him and whatever side of him was currently winning. He doesn't have a collar, the girl said. She had crouched a few feet from me and was examining me with the focused intensity of a scientist presented with a new specimen. He looks hungry, she added. Dad, look at him. He is literally looking at us right now like he is a person who needs help and knows that we are the help. Her father crouched too. He was closer now. I could smell coffee and sawdust and the particular tired warmth of a man who worked with his hands for a living. I held his gaze and tried to communicate everything I needed to communicate without the use of language, which was the only option I had available to me right now. He held my gaze back for a long moment. Then he stood up and went to the counter and came back with 2 packets of beef jerky and set them on the floor in front of me. I ate the first one in what I will call for seconds. He opened the second one and set it down with the quiet expression of a man who had just made up his mind about something. His name was Carl Marsh. His daughter was Sophie. They were from Millhaven, about 90 miles southwest, in a blue pickup that smelled like sawdust and old coffee. Sophie sat in the back seat with me and talked for the entire 90 miles, without pausing in any way that suggested she was planning to stop before we arrived. She told me about her school and her teacher, Mr. Patterson, who she described as pretty okay for an adult, which appeared to be a meaningful endorsement in her framework. She told me about her best friend Lily, and the time Lily had accidentally released 17 butterflies from a science project inside the classroom during math. She told me about Patrol, their old dog, who had died 3 years ago. How she still sometimes forgot and reached for him in the morning before she remembered. You're not Patrol, she said, without any sadness in it, just information. But you've got the same thing he had. Like you're really in there, you know? She named me Ghost because you showed up out of nowhere, she explained, with the complete certainty of someone who knows they have gotten the name exactly right. I had complicated feelings about being named Ghost, but I had no formal process for registering an objection, and the name had the advantage of being accurate. Millhaven was a small town, the kind with 1 main street and 1 traffic light, and everyone who knew the hardware store also knew the name of the person who ran it. Carl's house was a white frame building at the end of a gravel road on the north side of town, with a covered porch and a yard that backed up against trees. There was a worn patch of grass near the back fence, where Patrol had clearly spent a significant portion of his time. I noticed it immediately. These things leave traces. Carl set up food and water in the kitchen without ceremony, the practiced ease of someone who had done this before and still remembered exactly how it worked. Sophie gave me a full tour of the house with the gravity of a real estate agent, presenting a significant property to a serious buyer. This is the living room. Dad watches sports in here, which means football from September through February and then complaining about football from March through August. This is the kitchen. Dad can cook for things: pasta, eggs, grilled cheese, and soup from a can. He is currently working on a 5th thing. Carl, from the hallway, did not deny this. This is my room. She stood in the doorway with her arms slightly out, presenting it. Posters of animals covered 1 wall, a desk buried in drawings, a full bookshelf. You can sleep here if you want. Patrol used to rotate between rooms. He had a system. We never fully understood the system, but we respected it. I chose Sophie's room. It felt right in a way. I chose not to examine it closely. I curled on the folded quilt she put down and listened to the house settle around me. Carl made pasta for dinner. I could smell it from the bedroom, garlic and olive oil, and the particular smell of a pan that had been used and loved for 1,000 meals. Sophie brought me a small plate of chicken she had apparently negotiated from her father during the cooking process. She set it down with appropriate ceremony. "You're welcome," she said, before I had communicated any thanks, because she had already decided I was grateful and was choosing to receive it on my behalf. I ate slowly this time. There was no urgency here. The mountain was behind me. The road was waiting. Tonight I could just be somewhere safe and warm and still. Sophie fell asleep faster than I expected, mid-sentence in the middle of something about a rabbit she had seen last Thursday near the back fence by the tree line. I lay on the quilt in the corner and listened to her breathe and ran the numbers one more time. 230 miles east to KEST to Mia, to the blue door. 230 miles with no car, no map, no voice. No way to ask for help in any language that anyone in this world would recognize as language. I thought about the vision on the mountain, the healing on the road shoulder, the low hum at the back of my skull that I still hadn't fully decoded. Something was growing in me. Something the second existence was building without my knowledge or consent, in the direction of something I couldn't see yet from here. But the direction of whatever I was becoming pointed east. And east was where Mia was. That was the only thing that needed to be true for the rest to be manageable. I thought about Derek again in the quiet of Sophie's room. Derek Walsh, 6'2", permanently optimistic, the kind of person who showed up early to everything and meant it. We had been friends since we were 14. He had defended me from a guy twice his size once using nothing but words and complete conviction in his own correctness. He had won. Derek had a way of winning arguments by making the other person feel like they had arrived at his conclusion themselves, which was somehow never annoying. He had used that same technique to get me on this hike. "You need this," he had said. "Mia said you've been stressed. The mountains will reset you." He had been right that I needed it. He had been wrong about the reset, unless dying and coming back as a dog counted as a form of resetting, which was possible. I thought about Derek and Mia in the same room after I disappeared. The weight of the shared loss, the way it would press between them differently than it pressed on anyone else. Derek would try to hold things together for her. He always did. He would make calls, coordinate searches, keep his own grief packed away behind the practical things. Mia would see through that. She always saw through the practical things to whatever was underneath. She had the quality of attention that people spend years trying to earn. I wondered how long they would hold on to hope before hope became something else. Something quieter. The thing people call acceptance when they mean survival. I did not want her to accept it. I knew that was selfish. She deserved to heal. She deserved everything good that was still waiting for her on the other side of this. But I was going to get to her before any of that happened. That was not hope. That was not comfort thinking. That was the only fact I had left, and I was keeping it. I pressed my nose against the quilt and breathed in Sophie's fruity shampoo, and the smell of washed cotton and something that reminded me, faintly, of home. Carl was up before the sun. I heard him in the kitchen before the light changed. The sounds of someone who had made peace with early mornings years ago. The coffee maker. The low murmur of a weather report. The creak of a specific floorboard that told me exactly which corner of the kitchen he was standing in. I patted down the hallway and found him at the table with both hands around a mug, looking out the window at the dark yard and the darker tree line beyond it. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He moved his eyes from the window to me and nodded slightly, the way people acknowledge something they were already expecting. "Early riser," he said, not a question. An observation he filed away with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to apply to most things he encountered. He set a bowl of food down without ceremony and poured himself more coffee and sat back down and looked out the window again. The radio gave the weather for 4 counties. Partly cloudy, high of 43, wind from the northwest. The morning was doing what mornings do in late October in small towns far from anywhere significant. For a while, neither of us said anything. Carl was not a man who talked to fill silence. He was comfortable in it the way people are who have lived with it long enough. "I used to have a dog," he said eventually, more to himself than to anyone. The way people talk when they need to say something and no one in particular needs to hear it. Labmix found him behind the grocery store when Sophie was 3. She named him Patrol because he walked the fence line every single morning without fail. He turned the mug between his hands. Outside, the first edge of the sun was beginning to show above the tree line, turning the sky the color of old copper. He died 3 years ago. Old age, mostly. Sophie was devastated. A pause. I was too. actually. More than I expected. More than seemed proportionate to the situation. He had this way of looking at you, like he was paying attention to the actual version of you, not the surface, the real one underneath, whatever that looked like today. He looked at me directly then, with the careful focus of a man who had been thinking about something for a while and had finally decided to say the whole thing out loud. You've got the same thing. I noticed it at the gas station when I was deciding whether to pick you up. You already knew what I was going to do before I did, like you were just waiting for me to catch up to something you could already see. Patrol did that too. It used to unsettle me. Now I find it more reassuring than unsettling. I held his gaze. The sun was fully above the tree line now, the kitchen filling with a specific quality of early light that belonged to this time of year and no other. East's everything I needed was east of where I was sitting at this table. I felt the pull of it constantly now, like a compass needle that had no interest in pointing anywhere else. Carl followed my eyes toward the window, held them there a moment, then looked back at me with the expression of a man who had just confirmed something he already suspected. Sophie's going to want you to stay, he said. She already named you. In her world, that's a binding legal commitment with no statute of limitations and no appeal process. A beat, he turned the mug once more. But I've got a feeling you've got somewhere to be, and I've got a feeling it's not here with us in Millhaven. I looked at the window. I looked back at him. He was right on both counts, and we both understood that, and neither of us needed to say so out loud. You can stay as long as you need, he said. And when you're ready to leave, I'll understand completely. I just wanted to say that before Sophie wakes up and complicates things. That was the moment something changed in my chest. Not a power, not an ability. Something older and quieter than either of those things, which had names I already knew. Gratitude. Real, full, sharp-edged gratitude for a man who had stopped on a road shoulder and asked nothing in return and would never know what he had actually done. I would not forget Carl Marsh. Whatever I became on the road east, whatever this journey turned into, I would carry this kitchen and this morning with me all the way there. Sophie woke up at 7:15 with the energy of someone who had slept perfectly and intended to extract every possible minute from the day that was waiting for her. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked between Carl and me, and arrived at the immediate conclusion that something had happened while she was sleeping. Were you two just sitting here in the dark having a moment? She asked, with the accuracy of a child who has not yet learned to be diplomatic about what she observes. Having coffee, Carl said. Sophie looked at the single mug, looked at me, then apparently decided this was acceptable and sat down at the table to start her morning. She pulled out a drawing she had been working on and added to it with total concentration while Carl made eggs and the radio moved from weather to local news. I watched her draw. She was drawing a dog, which I was fairly certain was meant to be me, though the proportions indicated she was working in an impressionistic style. Carl made eggs that were actually good, which added another item to the four things Sophie had described, though perhaps she was tracking a different category of excellence. After breakfast, I went into the yard and stood at the back fence and looked east through the gap in the tree line for a long time, running the route in my head. 230 miles to Keswick, on foot and on whatever transportation I could find, moving through terrain and towns I didn't know, and a body people couldn't decipher. I needed roads. I needed people who were already heading east. I needed to be strategic about momentum and not waste days on dead ends or wrong directions. The first target was a town called Harmon, roughly 40 miles northeast. I could smell the larger road from here on the right wind, diesel and asphalt and morning exhaust. 40 miles was a number I could hold without flinching. 40 miles, then another 40, then however many more it took until I was standing in front of her blue door. When I came back inside, Carl was washing the breakfast dishes and Sophie was on the living room floor, with her marine biology book open to a spread about deep-sea creatures. She looked up and patted the floor beside her without a word. I lay down next to her and she put her hand on my back and turned a page, and neither of us said anything. I stayed there for most of an hour. Just that, the warmth of her hand and the sound of pages and Carl moving around in the kitchen, and the house being a house around us. I wanted to remember this, the specific weight of this ordinary morning, because ordinary mornings with people you care about were exactly what I was fighting to get back to. Not powers, not the road, not whatever I was becoming mile by mile. Just ordinary life with Mia. Sunday pancakes and bad coffee and her pretending she hadn't burned anything. It happened in the afternoon while Sophie was at school and Carl was in the yard splitting wood with the steady, unhurried rhythm of a man who had done it 10,000 times. I was sitting on the porch steps watching the road when the hum at the back of my skull The one I had first noticed on the mountain suddenly sharpened into something clear. Not painfully, more like a radio dial turning until static becomes music. Sudden and precise and completely unmistakable as a moment of change that could not be undone. I became aware of something moving in the tree line. Not dangerous, something alive, warm-blooded, picking its way slowly through the undergrowth about 40 meters north. A deer. I could feel its presence before I could see it. A warm outline in my awareness like a shape drawn in heat. Then it stepped into the open and confirmed itself. The awareness had come first, before the eyes. That was the thing, the sensing. The radar I had felt pressing flat against itself on the mountain had turned on completely. It was not just sight. It was something that lived in the space between sight and knowing. An awareness of living things around me within a radius that felt like a held breath. I sat very still and let it expand outward. The deer. A crow in the oak at the corner of the yard. Carl behind the house, his axe rhythm steady and present and calm. To squirrels in the maple near the fence. A cat somewhere behind the neighbor's garage, irritated about something. And then, at the far edge of the awareness, something new, a car. Moving east on the highway to miles north. I couldn't feel the car itself, but I could feel the driver. One warm presence moving through space at the speed of a road. Moving east, toward Harmon, almost certainly. The first piece of a route I had been assembling all day connecting suddenly to something real and usable and pointing the right direction. I stood up from the porch steps. I looked at the road. I looked back at the house, at the light in the window, at the curl of wood smoke from the chimney. Tomorrow. I would leave tomorrow morning before Sophie woke up. One more evening here. One more of Carl's for things for dinner. One more night on Sophie's quilt in the corner. Then east, into everything I didn't know yet, toward the one thing I had always known. Moving one ability at a time, toward whatever I was becoming and whoever I was finding. Dinner that night was grilled cheese and tomato soup, made with the focused care of a man who had decided long ago that if you could only cook for things, they should be excellent. Sophie had been planning something since she got home from school. I could see it in the deliberate, casual way she moved through the kitchen, waiting for the right moment. The right moment arrived when Carl set the soup bowls down. She produced a drawing from her school bag and placed it on the table, with the formality of a formal presentation. It showed a large dog with impressively long legs standing on a mountain, a sun overhead, and a small figure visible in the distance at the edge of the paper. "That's you," she said, pointing at the dog. Then the distant figure. "And that's the person you're looking for." She said it simply, like she had known this from the beginning. Carl looked at the drawing, then at me, then at his soup. He stirred it slowly once. "Sophie, how did you know he was looking for someone?" Sophie gave him the look she reserved for questions that should not have required asking. "Dad, look at his eyes. He's always looking for someone. It's obvious." Carl did not answer that. He ate his grilled cheese and let the statement settle over the table like a true thing that had no need of argument or elaboration. After Sophie went to bed, Carl and I sat on the porch in the dark. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. Somewhere in the trees an owl was asking its one question. "I called around this afternoon," Carl said after a while. "There's a search happening up on the northern ridge. 2 hikers went missing Saturday. No sign yet." He let that sit. I kept still. The night air smelled of wood smoke and dead leaves and the cold that was coming. The deep settled cold of actual winter still a few weeks away. "They found a phone at the base of a cliff," he said, "and some equipment, but nothing else." He looked sideways at me, not accusatory, more like someone testing a quiet theory. I didn't move. I didn't change my breathing. I held myself still and let the silence do what silence does when no one tries to fill it with something more convenient. "I hope whoever is waiting for those 2 men is still waiting," Carl said finally. He stood up and went inside and left the door slightly open behind him, which I understood. I stayed on the porch long after the light in his room went out. The cold settled and the owl went quiet and the stars came out one county at a time across the dark sky. Mia was still waiting. I didn't know this as hard fact. I knew it the way you know something when knowing and hoping have been pressed together long enough to merge. She was still waiting, and between me and her, there were 230 miles of road I hadn't traveled yet, and I was going to travel every single one of them. I left before Sophie woke up. This was intentional. Goodbyes with 7-year-olds who have named you are a category of difficult I was not emotionally equipped to handle. Carl was in the kitchen. He had put together a small cloth bag with food inside. Beef jerky, a folded piece of cornbread wrapped in a napkin, a small apple. He set it on the floor without explanation. I ate everything while he stood at the window with his coffee and looked at the first light coming up over the tree line. When I finished, he crouched down to my level. The kitchen light was still the pale early kind. The radio wasn't on yet. The house was as quiet as it ever gets. There's a fuel depot on Route 9, about 3 miles north, he said. Truck driver there named Harris. Runs east twice a week. He's the kind of man who picks up strays. He looked at me steadily. I don't know how you understand what I'm saying. I don't fully understand it myself. But I think you understand more than you let anyone see. There was something in his eyes that looked like the particular sadness of a person who has learned, more than once, that the things he cares about have to leave eventually. Go find whoever you're looking for, he said. Don't stop. Don't get distracted by the detours. And if you get there, I hope it turns out to be worth every single mile. He stood up and went to the window and looked at the yard and did not look back, because we had agreed without saying it that this was how this particular morning ended. I went to the door. I looked back once at the kitchen, the worn table, Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, the 4 things Carl could cook, the 5th still in progress. Then I turned east and walked out into the morning and started moving, one paw in front of the other, toward Harmon and everything that came after Harmon. The first mile was a county road, gravel shoulder, the kind of road that connects places people pass through to places they actually want to be. Functional and unmemorable, the sensing was fully on now. I could feel the living world around me in a radius that seemed slightly larger than the day before, like a muscle that had warmed up overnight. Burrs in the oaks along the road, a rabbit frozen in a field to my left, deciding whether I was a threat worth running from. A dog behind a farmhouse fence who barked twice. The farmhouse dog went quiet after the second bark. Something in my posture or my presence or whatever frequency I was putting out had given him information he found confusing. I walked steadily, the pace of someone who has a long way to go and has made the decision not to waste energy on urgency that couldn't be maintained over to 100 miles. Around mile 3, the gravel road curved east and widened and the highway appeared ahead of me. 2 lanes each direction, regular traffic moving in both directions. I sat at the edge of the on-ramp and watched traffic for 20 minutes, noting direction, noting the pattern, filing information about how this particular section of road worked. Most vehicles were heading west, a smaller number east. I needed east. I needed east and I needed a driver who would stop for a small dirty dog on a highway shoulder. A pickup similar to Carl's came off the highway and slowed at a fuel station across the road. East-facing plates. Driver got out, went inside, came back with a coffee and a bag. I crossed when traffic cleared and sat near the station entrance with the patient stillness of an animal that has decided this is exactly where it is supposed to be right now. It took 40 minutes. The driver was a woman in her 50s named Ruth, embroidered on her work jacket, who saw me coming out and stopped walking and said, "Oh honey." She looked around for an owner, checked for a collar, said "Oh honey" to more times, then opened her passenger door and looked at me and waited to see what I would do. I jumped in. She pulled back onto the highway and headed east, talking to me in the easy, comfortable way of someone who has had dogs their whole life and never stopped. She drove me 40 miles to a town called Brackfield before her exit came, and she turned off the highway and set me down on the shoulder with half her granola bar. I ate the granola bar and watched her taillights disappear and noted my position. 40 miles closer, 190 miles remaining, to new abilities confirmed and active, and something else. Something I noticed as I stood on the shoulder in Brackfield and tested the radius of the sensing deliberately for the first time since leaving Millhaven. It had grown, not dramatically, but grown measurably, and within it, the quality of the awareness had sharpened. I could feel not just presence, but something like attention. The difference between a person moving through space with their mind somewhere else, and a person who was focused on something directly in front of them. To different qualities of warmth. I stood in Brackfield in the cold afternoon light and breathed slowly and let myself understand what was accumulating inside me, one piece of evidence at a time. I was not the same creature I had been on the mountain, not the same as I had been on the road shoulder watching cuts close. I was changing, incrementally, in one direction, east. That was the direction. And the name waiting at the end of the direction was Mia. And sometimes that is genuinely enough to build everything else around. Type "find her" in the comments if you think Ethan makes it to Mia before she stops waiting, or type "to late" if you think grief already changed everything. Part 2 is coming. I have been a dog for 6 days. 6 days since the mountain, since the fall, since the 47 missed calls on a cracked screen I couldn't answer. 6 days since I have been Ethan Cole, structural engineer, fiancé. The kind of person who set to alarms and still showed up 5 minutes early to everything. Now I was Ghost, a small dirty dog with no collar, to confirmed abilities, a third that was still figuring itself out, and 190 miles left to cover. The road east from Brackfield was a two-lane state highway that smelled of diesel and cold asphalt, and the particular emptiness of rural roads in late October. I walked the shoulder and kept the sensing open and thought about Mia, and counted miles the way you count something when counting is the only control you have left. Brackfield itself was for blocks and a stoplight and a diner that smelled like coffee, and bacon grease from half a mile away in a way that made my stomach loud. I sat outside the diner for 11 minutes before a man in a canvas jacket came out with a paper bag and a coffee and looked at me the way people look when they've already decided. His name was Pete. He was a roofer heading to a job site in Lenox, which was 22 miles east, and he drove a white van with a ladder rack and country music on the radio. He gave me half a breakfast sandwich and talked about the job the entire drive. New roof on a Victorian house that the owners had let go too long. Always the same story, he said. I listened and watched the road and noted landmarks and calculated distance the way I always had, except now the calculation had a different kind of weight attached to it. Pete let me out on the main street of Lenox with a firm good luck. Buddy that I understood was the maximum emotional investment he was prepared to make, which was fair. Lenox was bigger than Brackfield. The traffic lights, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a bar with a neon sign in the window that had been partially burned out for what looked like years. The sensing picked up more people here. The quality of the crowd information was different in a town than on open road, denser, more layered, harder to separate into individuals. I was learning to filter it, the way you learn to hear a specific voice in a loud room. The sensing was developing a kind of focus I hadn't had on the mountain. I could distinguish between a person walking with purpose and a person wandering, between someone looking for something and someone who was just passing through. That distinction was going to matter. I needed people heading east with space in their vehicles and the kind of personality that stopped for animals instead of driving past. I sat at the edge of a gas station parking lot on the east side of Lenox and ran the sensing outward and waited for the right signature to come through. It took 40 minutes. A woman in a green SUV with 2 empty back seats and a reusable shopping bag on the passenger floor, and the calm, focused warmth of someone going somewhere specific. She was maybe 40. With a practical ponytail and the air of someone who had made this drive before and had the audiobook queued up and the coffee ready and no particular reason to rush. She saw me when she came out of the station stop, looked around for an owner, looked at me again. The decision happened faster than it had with Carl. Some people are already there. Her name was Diana. She was heading to a town called Sherwood, 53 miles east, to visit her sister who had just had a baby and needed someone to bring food and help with laundry. She talked about the baby for 20 minutes and then about her sister and then about a difficult year her family had been having, the way people sometimes talk to dogs because dogs don't judge. I listened to all of it, not just because I had no choice, but because there was something in the act of listening, the real kind, that felt like the only useful thing I had left to offer anyone. Diana drove well. She merged cleanly and kept a steady speed, and the audiobook she had queued turned out to be a thriller about a woman who had faked her own death and reinvented herself. I found this thematically relevant and paid attention to it with what I suspected was a level of engagement Diana found unusual in a passenger who didn't have opposable thumbs. She let me out at the edge of Sherwood with a piece of string cheese and a look that said she was genuinely conflicted about not taking me further and had decided to live with it. I watched her turn north into a residential neighborhood and then I turned east and kept moving, because that was the only thing I knew how to do that made any of this survivable. I had been walking for about an hour east of Sherwood when I noticed something was different about the way the ground felt under my paws. Not softer, the opposite, like the contact between my feet and the road had more information in it than it used to, more feedback, more grip. I tested it carefully, stopped on a patch of gravel and pressed down harder than usual. The gravel didn't shift under me the way gravel shifts. It felt almost locked. I tried something else. Found a fallen branch about twice the length of my body and pushed against it with my front paws to see what happened. The branch moved. Not a little. It moved cleanly and quickly in a way that had nothing to do with the size of the body pushing it. I stared at the branch for a moment. Strength. That was what was accumulating now. Not visible, not dramatic, not the kind that showed on the outside, but real and present and growing with the miles. I thought about the structure of what was happening to me. 3 abilities so far: the vision, the healing, the sensing. Now the beginning of a 4th. Each one had come after a threshold. A distance covered, a challenge survived, a moment of connection with someone who saw more than a dog and gave something anyway. Carl had given me shelter and food and the kind of practical human dignity that asks nothing back. Diana had given me 53 miles and a piece of string cheese and her real attention. Pete had given me 22 miles and half a breakfast sandwich and a monologue about Victorian roofing that I had found, genuinely, more interesting than expected. Something in this world rewarded connection. Not combat, not suffering, connection. Each time I let someone actually see me, something had shifted and locked into place. I filed that observation away and pushed the branch one more time just to confirm what I already knew. It moved like it weighed nothing. I kept walking. The afternoon went gray around 4, and by 5 the light was nearly gone, and I was still 11 miles from the next town on the route I had been building in my head. This was the part of the plan that had no good solution. I couldn't knock on doors. I couldn't check into a motel. I couldn't explain my situation to anyone who might help. I found a culvert under a farm road about 30 yards from the highway and crawled inside and lay down and listened to the occasional rush of traffic and the wind in the fields. It was cold, but not unbearably cold. The body handled cold better now than it had on the mountain. Another small upgrade I hadn't asked for and wouldn't have thought to request. I lay there and thought about what Carl had told me before I left. The trucker named Harris at the fuel depot on Route 9. I had passed Route 9. I had missed the turn by a day. That was the thing about not having a map and not being able to read road signs at speed from the shoulder of a highway. You miss things. You had to adapt and find other routes. I thought about Mia's apartment, the layout of it, the way the kitchen connected to the living room without a real boundary, just a change in flooring from tile to wood. I thought about the window above her kitchen sink that looked out onto the courtyard, where the building super kept a pot of lavender that survived every winter somehow. I thought about sitting at her kitchen table on Sunday mornings with bad coffee and the newspaper. She still got in paper form because she said screens made everything feel temporary. Those Sunday mornings were the best thing I had. Not the dramatic moments, not the anniversaries or the vacations or the ring I had bought with more care than I had bought anything. The Sunday mornings, the burned pancakes and the bad coffee and the newspaper and the lavender pot outside the window and the specific quality of silence between two people at ease. That was what I was walking toward. Not a reunion, not a miracle, just an ordinary Sunday morning on the other side of 160 miles of road I hadn't covered yet. I slept in the culvert and dreamed for the first time since the mountain, and the dream was exactly what I had been thinking about, which felt like something more than coincidence. I was on the highway shoulder by 6 the next morning, moving east. The sensing wide open and the cold sharp and the sky the color of pale metal above the flat fields. The fuel depot appeared 2 miles up the road. Not Route 9, but a regional depot on a county road. The kind of place where trucks idled in the early dark while drivers got coffee. I hadn't planned for this, but the sensing picked up something as I approached. A specific quality of presence. Someone who had been awake for a long time and was used to long distances. There were 3 trucks in the lot. I walked the perimeter slowly and let the sensing do the work. The drivers were inside the depot building. One was still in his cab. The one in his cab was awake, eating something based on the smell. A wrap sandwich from a gas station bag, the particular combination of bread and processed cheese I had learned to recognize. I sat below the driver's side window of the 3rd truck and waited. 30 seconds later, the window rolled down and a man looked down at me with the expression of someone not surprised. He was in his 60s, heavy set, with a gray beard and the careful, unhurried eyes of someone who had driven a lot of miles and developed patience as a survival mechanism. "Where are you headed?" he said, like it was a normal question to ask a dog on a depot lot at 6 in the morning. Like this was a thing that happened regularly in his life. I looked east along the highway. I looked back at him. I did the thing I had learned to do. Hold the gaze and wait and let the person's own intelligence complete the sentence. He looked at the highway. He looked back at me. He ate the last of his sandwich and crumpled the wrapper and put it in a bag and said, "I'm going as far as Colton." That helped. Colton was 68 miles east. I had checked the sign on the depot wall that listed distances. 68 miles was more than any single leg I had covered since leaving Millhaven. I stood up and looked at the truck door with the expression of a creature that understood it could not open a truck door and was hoping this information would be acted upon. His name was Frank Reyes. He had been driving the same east-west route for 19 years. He knew every fuel stop, every diner, every speed trap, every section of road that got icy first. He talked about the road the way Carl had talked about the fence and the firewood, the way people talk about things they have spent so long without the thing and the person have merged. I listened and watched the highway unspool outside the window and felt the sensing stretched east, feeling for Keswick somewhere beyond the horizon like a signal I was getting closer to. Frank ate a second sandwich around mile 30 and offered me half of it without fanfare. The way people share food with dogs they have decided belong in the cab with them. "You've got somewhere specific you're going," he said around mile 50. Not a question. A statement delivered with the confidence of a man who had spent 19 years reading roads and weather. Most dogs I pick up, they're just happy to be warm. You're watching the road, watching the signs. A pause. That's a different kind of dog. I watched the road and said nothing, which was all I could contribute, and Frank seemed to find this response appropriate. He let me out at the Colton truck stop with a bottle cap full of water from his own bottle, and a look that lasted a half second longer than most looks from strangers lasted. "Good luck with wherever you're going," he said. "I hope it's worth the trouble you're clearly going to." He rolled the window up and pulled back into traffic, and I watched him go. Colton was a real town. A town with a downtown and a hospital and a university on the north side that gave the whole place a particular energy of people in transition. I was 122 miles from Keswick. I stood at the edge of the Colton truck stop and did the math and felt something that was not hope exactly, but was adjacent to it. More than halfway. I was more than halfway to her. The distance that had felt impossible on the mountain was shrinking under my paws one ride at a time. I spent 2 hours in Colton resting and eating from an unattended bowl outside a coffee shop that had a hand-lettered sign saying community dog water and snacks, which I appreciated. The sensing in Colton was busy and layered and interesting in the way that universities make everything interesting. Too many kinds of attention moving in too many directions at once. I walked through a small park at the center of town and let the sensing run freely. Cataloging presence is the way I use to catalog stress points in a building, looking for the load-bearing ones. There was a girl sitting on a bench near the fountain who had the quality of presence I had learned to associate with deep and unmoving grief. Still on the outside, very loud on the inside. I didn't mean to stop. I had 122 miles to cover, and no rational reason to approach a stranger on a park bench who had not asked for anything from me. But I stopped, and I walked to the bench and sat down a few feet from her and looked at the fountain and waited, which is apparently what I did now when something needed to happen. She was in her early 20s with short hair and a coat that was slightly too big for her. She had been crying recently, not currently, but recently and for a long time before that. She looked at me. She looked at the fountain. She looked back at me. "You're not supposed to be in the park without a leash," she said. Her voice had the flat quality of someone running on empty. I did not appear to have a leash. This was accurate. I acknowledged this fact by continuing to sit there and look at the fountain with her. After a moment, she said, "My mom died 3 weeks ago." Not to me, exactly. More to the space in front of her that had been empty until I arrived and was now slightly less so. I had nothing to offer her. No words. No gesture that would mean anything. Just the presence of a living creature willing to sit beside someone who was sitting with something terrible. We sat there for 20 minutes. She talked sometimes and went quiet sometimes, and I stayed for all of it. The fountain kept running. A pigeon explored the far end of the bench. When she finally stood up, she put her hand on my head for a moment. Not petting, just contact. The specific kind of touch that means I acknowledge you are real and here. "Thank you," she said to a dog, with complete sincerity. Then she pulled her coat tighter and walked away across the park toward whatever came next in a life that had recently broken. I sat on the bench alone for a while after she left and thought about what had just happened. Not the sitting, the shift that had happened inside me while I was sitting. The sensing had changed again during those 20 minutes. The radius had not grown, but the depth had. I could feel not just the presence of living things, but the weight they were carrying. Not emotions, exactly. More like the specific gravity of a person's current moment. Light or heavy, moving or still, looking forward or turned inward on something they couldn't put down. That was going to matter in ways I couldn't fully see yet. I filed it and stood up and turned east and kept moving, because that was the only direction that was mine to take. The east side of Colton was where the town stopped pretending to be a town and became a long industrial strip of warehouses and freight companies and chain restaurants. I was moving through the parking lot of a large hardware store when the sensing picked up something. That made me stop and stand very still. The dogs not large. The quality of their presence was different from the farmhouse dog who had barked twice and gone quiet. These were focused. They had noticed me already. They came around the corner of the building at a walk that was deliberate and unhurried in the way that things are when they don't feel a need to hurry. The German shepherds, both significantly larger than me, both with a specific quality of attention that meant they had made a preliminary assessment and were confirming it. The rational response to this situation was to back away slowly and find a different route around the building. I knew this. My human brain was clear on this point. Instead, I stood my ground because backing away felt like a direction I was unwilling to move in, and because something in me was curious about what the strength actually meant. The larger of the two dogs stopped about 10 feet from me and stared. This was the question portion of the interaction. The answer I gave in the next few seconds would determine everything. I stared back, not aggressively, not submission either. The steady level gaze of something that had been a structural engineer for years and understood load bearing clearly. The dog held the stare for 15 seconds. This is a long time in dog interaction terms. At the end of the 15 seconds, he turned his head slightly and the other dog sat down. They let me pass. I walked between them and around the corner of the hardware store and out the other side and did not look back, because looking back would have been the wrong move. I was 100 yards away before I let myself think about what had just happened, what I had communicated through posture and gaze, and whatever the sensing was putting out from me. Not aggression, not threat, something harder to name. The quality of something that has been through enough, that it no longer has anything left to prove to anyone, including itself. I didn't know if that was strength or just the residue of dying and coming back in a form that had no room left for unnecessary fear. Maybe those were the same thing. East of Colton, the highway widened and the towns came closer together, and the distance between me and Keswick started to feel like a real number instead of a theoretical one. 80 miles. I was 80 miles from here. That was a number I could hold in my chest without it crushing anything. That was a number with a shape I could see the end of. The rides came easier now. I had learned the rhythm of it. The sensing gave me the profile of people before they saw me, and I positioned myself where the right kind of person would stop. A retired teacher named Barbara took me 30 miles in a station wagon that smelled of books and lavender, which I took as a sign of something, though I couldn't have said what. She told me about her garden and her late husband and the class of students she still thought about 20 years later, the ones who had been harder to reach but had gotten there eventually. She let me out in a town called Vera with a dog biscuit from the glove compartment, and the information that she always kept dog biscuits there just in case, which I believed completely. A college student named Marcus took me the next 15 miles in a car that smelled of fast food and energy drinks and contained approximately 400 unread text messages worth of anxiety. He was stressed about a presentation he had to give on Monday that he had not prepared for and was now running through out loud in the car, using me as the audience, which I was happy to be. Does that make sense? He asked me at one point. I looked at him steadily. He adjusted the argument, delivered it again, and the second version was meaningfully better. I was glad to help. He let me out at a rest stop 35 miles from Keswick with genuine gratitude and the last of his fries, which I ate while watching his taillights disappear into the gathering dark. 35 miles. I stood at that rest stop and felt the sensing reach east and felt something at the edge of it that I had not felt before. Something familiar in a way I could not explain. Not a presence exactly, more like the shape of a space I had been inside before. The particular quality of a place where someone I knew spent a significant amount of time. I was imagining it. I told myself I was imagining it. But the thing at the edge of the sensing didn't move and didn't change, and I stood there breathing cold air and just feeling it. Her apartment. I was close enough that whatever the sensing was becoming could reach the edge of the space where she lived. That was what I was feeling. That was what it was. I stood at that rest stop for a long time with the dark coming in around me, and 35 miles left and something that felt, for the first time since the mountain, like arrival. I needed somewhere to sleep. 35 miles was not a number I could cover in the dark on a highway shoulder without something going wrong. The rest stop had a small service building with a narrow overhang on the south side. That was out of the wind. I curled under it and did the calculations for the morning. 2 or 3 more rides to cover 35 miles, or one long one if the right vehicle came through early. I needed to be moving by 6 to have any chance of arriving before dark. The cold settled around midnight, and I pulled myself tighter and thought about Mia, the way I had been thinking about her every night since the mountain, as a fixed point in a moving world. I thought about whether she was sleeping, whether she had people with her, whether Derek was nearby, or whether the search on the mountain had taken him somewhere too far to be useful to her. I thought about her kitchen table and the Sunday mornings, and I held onto those images with everything I had and let the cold do what cold did, and waited for the morning. At 3 in the morning, a vehicle pulled into the rest stop, and a man got out and stretched and looked around. and then looked at the south wall of the service building and found me. He was a mechanic, based on the smell of his hands and the work jacket and the toolbox visible through the window of his truck. Mid-40s. The sensing said tired, but not distressed. He crouched down and looked at me without reaching for me, which was the correct approach and which I noted as evidence of a person who had some experience with animals. Cold night to be out here, he said. He reached into his cab and came back with a flannel shirt that had clearly been living behind the seat for a while, which he folded and set next to me. I looked at the shirt. I looked at him. He shrugged. It's not doing anything back there. He went inside the service building and came back with coffee and sat on the curb and drank it. His name was Roy. He was driving back from a job in Weston and had stopped because he got tired around midnight and had learned not to push through tired the hard way. Twice. We sat there together for about 40 minutes. Roy drank his coffee. I lay on the flannel shirt. The highway was quiet. Occasionally a truck went past and the air moved and settled again. You're heading somewhere, Roy said eventually. He had the same quality Carl and Frank had, the kind of perception that developed in people who spent a lot of time in their own heads on long drives. I can take you as far as Delwood, he said. That's about 20 miles east. After that I turn north, but it gets you closer to wherever you're trying to get to. Delwood was 20 miles from Kestwick. I absorbed this information with a specific quality of stillness that I had when something significant happened and I needed a moment with it. 20 miles from Kestwick. One more ride. One more person moving in the right direction with room in their vehicle, and then I would be standing outside her blue door. Roy finished his coffee and rinsed the cup with water from a bottle and put it back in the truck, and opened the passenger door and looked at me and waited. I picked up the flannel shirt in my mouth. Roy watched this with the expression of a man who had seen a lot of strange things on long-haul routes and had decided to add this to the list. I put the shirt on the passenger seat and got in. Roy pulled back onto the highway. The sensing reached east and found the shape of the space I had found at the rest stop closer now. Much closer. The familiar quality of it was sharper, more detailed, like a photograph coming into focus from a blur. 20 miles. The number had a different weight than all the others. Roy let me out at the Delwood interchange at 4:30 in the morning, 18.5 miles from Keswick according to the sign at the top of the ramp. He drove north without looking back, which was the right way to handle it. I stood on the interchange with the cold and the highway and 18.5 miles and the sensing wide open. And that was when I felt something I had not felt before. Something that made the fur along my back stand up before I had consciously processed what it was. The familiar shape of Mia's space was there, east, exactly where it had been. But layered over it, closer, much closer than it should have been, was something else entirely. A presence moving toward Delwood from the north on the county road that crossed the interchange. Moving fast, the sensing said focused, intentional. Predatory is too dramatic a word, but not casual, not accidental. This was something that knew where it was going and had a reason for going there that was not good for whoever was at the end of the route. I was not at the end of any route worth caring about. I was a dog on a highway interchange with no collar and no name that anyone official knew. Nothing in that description was a target, but the presence kept coming, and it was coming toward this interchange. And the sensing, and the new depth it had developed in Colton, was reading something I could not ignore. I moved off the interchange and into the trees along the county road and waited. The sensing tracked the approaching presence the way I had learned to track everything, patient and still. A truck dark blue, no markings, moving too fast for a county road at 4 in the morning. It slowed as it passed the interchange entrance and then pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. A man got out. The sensing said controlled, practiced, the kind of calm that was not natural but trained. He looked at the interchange, at the sign, at the empty highway below it. He made a call as short, 3 words at most. Then he got back in the truck and drove east on the county road toward Kestwick, toward the shape I had been following across to 100 miles. I stood in the trees for 30 seconds, processing. The sensing was certain, and the certainty was not something I could explain or rationalize away or decide I had misread. That person was heading toward Mia, not toward Mia the building or Mia the neighborhood, toward Mia specifically. The sensing read it as clearly as it read anything. I came out of the trees and started running east on the county road in the dark. And I ran faster than I had run since the mountain, and I ran without any plan, except get there first. The speed surprised me. I had known about the strength. I had not known what it meant when combined with a body built for running, and a mind that had decided nothing else mattered. I covered the first mile at a time that made no sense for the body I was in. The road surface came up under my paws with perfect feedback, and I used it the way I use data, efficiently. The sensing stayed wide open and tracked the truck ahead of me on the county road. The blue shape of it moving east, and tracked the familiar presence of Mia's space getting closer. At mile 3 something else happened. The same gear click I had felt on the mountain, but larger this time. Like a door opening fully instead of swinging on a hinge. I felt the whole of what I was becoming settle into place like a structure finding its final form. Not piece by piece anymore. All of it together. The vision and the healing and the sensing and the strength. And something else. Something that had been building since the bench in Colton. Since the girl with her grief and the 20 minutes of sitting beside something that couldn't be fixed, but could be witnessed. An awareness of intention. The ability to feel, clearly and without doubt, the specific quality of what someone was moving toward. Not just whether they were calm or distressed. What they were for. The man in the blue truck was moving towards something that would cause harm. I didn't know the details. I didn't need the details. The intention was as clear as a signal with no static. I ran harder. The county road was dark and empty, and the cold air moved past me, and I stopped thinking about distance or exhaustion or what I would do when I got there. I just ran. 6 days of mountain and road and sleeping in culverts and borrowed truck cabs and the girl on the bench and the flannel shirt and Carl's kitchen and Sophie's quilt. 6 days of holding Mia's face in my chest like something I refused to let the cold reach. 6 days of one thing at a time and 1 mile at a time and one more ride going east. I ran through all of it and I got faster with every mile and the distance closed. And the familiar shape of her space grew sharp and present and real in the sensing. Until I could feel it breathing. Keswick appeared out of the dark at 5:40 in the morning. The first buildings, the first streetlights, the first residential streets going north off the county road. The sensing said the blue truck was 2 blocks ahead of me and had slowed. I cut north off the county road into the residential grid and ran parallel, using the sensing as a map. Her street, I knew it before I could see it, the way you know a place you have been 100 times, from the specific quality of its presence and whatever I had become. The blue truck was parked on the corner. The man was on foot now, moving south along the sidewalk toward a building I could see from half a block away with the clarity of the enhanced vision. A white brick building, 6 stories. A courtyard entrance with an iron gate that was currently unlatched, swinging slightly in the early morning wind. And a blue door. On the ground floor, first you need in from the gate. A blue door that needed a new coat of paint and that I had been walking toward for 6 days and 230 miles. I had imagined this moment 100 times during the nights in culverts and the backs of trucks. I had imagined arriving and sitting outside the door and waiting and what it would mean. I had not imagined arriving 6 seconds ahead of a man with a plan I needed to interrupt before it reached the door behind me. The man reached the gate and pushed it open and I came around the corner of the building at a dead run and I put myself between him and the courtyard entrance before he made it through. I did not bark. I did not growl. I stood in the gate opening and I looked at him and I let every single thing I had become in 6 days on that road come forward into the gaze. The SSS-Rank ability, whatever it was called and whatever framework this world operated by, was not a weapon. It was not a threat. It was something more specific than both of those. It was the gaze of something that could not be moved. Not by force, not by intimidation, not by the logical argument that a small dog had no right to block a full-grown man with a plan. He stopped, looked at me, looked at the building behind me. The sensing read a rapid recalibration in him, the specific quality of someone who had encountered something they had not prepared for. He took a step forward. I did not move. The strength was there. The healing was there. The sensing was reading him completely. And none of those things mattered as much as the fact that I was not leaving. He stopped again. 3 seconds of stillness on the sidewalk in Keswick at 5:40 in the morning with the streetlights still on and the city just beginning to wake up around us. Then his phone rang. He looked at it, answered, said something short, listened, put it away, looked at me one more time with something that was not quite any emotion I had a word for. Then he walked back to the blue truck and drove away and I watched him go until the taillights turned the corner and disappeared and the street was empty and quiet and mine. I turned back to the courtyard. The iron gate was still swinging slightly in the wind. The blue door was 20 feet away and the morning was getting lighter by degrees. I walked through the gate and across the courtyard and I sat down in front of the blue door. And I looked at it for a long time. The paint was the same. The small scratch near the bottom left corner from the time she had moved in with the dusk. That was slightly too wide was still there. The brass doorbell button had the small paper label with her name on it that she had written herself. in the particular way she wrote, slightly tilted, the letters leaning into each other. Mia Calloway. Her name on a small paper label on a brass doorbell button on a blue door that needed a new coat of paint. I had walked 230 miles to sit in front of this. I pressed the bell with my nose. I know how that sounds. I pressed it anyway, because I had come too far to not try the most obvious thing first. Nothing happened for 30 seconds. Then the light in the window above the door changed, the particular shift of light that meant a lamp had been turned on in a dark room. Then footsteps. Slow, the careful footsteps of someone who has been asleep and is not fully certain what they heard. Then the footsteps stopped just inside the door. A pause. The kind of pause that happens when a person is deciding whether to open the door or check through the peephole first, which was the correct instinct at 5:40 in the morning. Then the sound of the lock, the deadbolt going back, the handle turning, and the blue door opened and Mia stood there in the doorway in her gray sweater and her sleep-rumpled hair. She looked out at the courtyard, then down. Then she found me sitting in front of her door at 5:40 in the morning and her face went through something I could not name. She looked at me for a long time. The sensing read her with a clarity that almost undid everything I had been holding together for 6 days. The specific quality of her presence unmistakable. Grief, and underneath the grief, something that had not gone out yet. The kind of hope that people keep even when they have told themselves to stop keeping it because it refuses to leave. "Hi," she said, to a dog on her doorstep at 5:40 in the morning, with the specific gentleness of someone who had learned to be careful with things that might be fragile. I looked at her. The vision was sharp, and the sensing was reading everything, and the strength was there, and the healing was there, and all of it together was pointed at this one moment. She crouched down in front of me. She put her hand out, the way you put your hand out to a strange dog. Palm up, slow. The correct way, the way that said I am not a threat to you. I put my head in her hand. Her fingers closed around the side of my face the way they had closed around 1,000 things she cared about, like it was precious and the morning deserved it. Her breath caught. Just once, just slightly. The sensing caught it, and I held very still and let her feel whatever she was feeling without anything for me to interrupt or explain it. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. Her voice had the quality of someone saying a thing they had been keeping inside for a while and had finally decided to let out. Someone who would have walked a very long way to get somewhere if he thought it mattered. She stroked the side of my face and looked at me with her eyes that I had remembered across 100 miles. The morning was full of light now. The lavender pot in the courtyard was still there. The same one survived another season the way it always did against all reasonable expectation. I stayed in her hand and let the morning happen around us and thought about Carl's kitchen and Sophie's quilt and Roy's flannel shirt and the bench in Colton and the 230 miles. And I thought that I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I was in this body permanently or temporarily or what this world had planned for me after this moment on this doorstep. But I was here. I was in front of the blue door. I was in her hand. And whatever came next was going to happen from this position, from this place, from this specific morning. That was enough. After 6 days and 230 miles and for abilities and a flannel shirt and an owl that asked its one question and 47 missed calls on a cracked screen. That was enough for now. After 6 days of not knowing if enough was even possible, it turned out that enough was the most complete thing I had ever felt. Type stay if you think Ethan finds a way to stay with Mia in this form, or type human if you think there is a way back to his original body. Part 3 is coming and the answer might surprise you. I have been sitting in front of Mia's blue door for 3 days now. Not literally, but in every way that counted. I had not moved from that spot on her doorstep. She had let me in that first morning without hesitation. The way she did most things that felt right to her, without asking too many questions of herself or anyone else. Her apartment was exactly as I had held it in my memory across 130 miles. The tile to a transition between kitchen and living room. The lavender pot outside the window. The Sunday newspaper still stacked on the kitchen table, 3 weeks of them now, unread. That detail hit me in a place I did not have a name for, and I filed it away carefully. 3 weeks of newspapers. 3 weeks since the mountain. She had not canceled the subscription. She had not cleared his things from the shelf by the door. She was still waiting. I had known she would be. I had told myself I knew. But knowing and seeing are different things, and seeing her move through the apartment with his absence in every room was something else entirely. My name, in her apartment, was still Ghost. She had not asked where I came from or why I had appeared at her door at 5:40 in the morning. She had just let me in and made coffee. That was Mia. She had always had the quality of accepting the thing in front of her first and asking the philosophical questions later, which was one of the 10,000 reasons I had loved her. The apartment had 3 rooms and a bathroom, and the particular smell of a space that had been lived in by someone specific for long enough that the space had taken on their character. Books in every room, not arranged by anything logical, just wherever she had put them down when she finished them, which told you something about how her mind moved through the world. A half-finished painting on an easel in the corner of the living room. She had started painting during the lockdown 2 years ago and had never stopped, which was one of the things I had loved most. Photographs on the refrigerator. Her mother, her college roommates, Derek, and a hiking photo from 3 summers ago, laughing at something outside the frame. A photograph of us at the lake where the wedding was supposed to happen. Her in a blue dress and me squinting into the sun and both of us looking at the camera like it had interrupted something. I looked at that photograph for a long time on the first morning, from my position on the kitchen floor, which was the perspective I had now. It was level with my eyes exactly. She caught me looking at it. She was pouring coffee and she turned and saw me staring at the refrigerator, and she went very still for a moment and then poured the rest of the coffee. "That's Ethan," she said quietly. "The way you say a name when you are saying it for yourself, not for the person you're technically addressing. He was supposed to come home." I looked at the photograph and then at her, and then back at the photograph. She sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out the window. "They found some of his gear," she said, "on the mountain, but they keep saying the terrain makes the search difficult." A pause. Derek was there when it happened. He made it down. Derek was alive. I held onto the piece of information and turned it over and felt something unclench that had been clenched since the mountain. Derek had made it. He was here somewhere. "He calls me every day," Mia said. "Sometimes twice. He thinks if he keeps talking about it, I'll somehow be less alone with it, which is both wrong and the most Derek thing possible." I got up and walked to the table and put my head on her knee. She put her hand on my head automatically, the way you put your hand on something warm when you need warmth. "You're a very strange dog," she said. "You showed up at my door in the middle of the night and you look at me like you have opinions about everything and you never bark at anything. But you feel like someone I know." She said it without looking at me, looking at the window instead. "That's a strange thing to say to a dog. I'm aware of that. I'm saying it anyway." Derek showed up on the second morning. I heard him on the stairs before Mia did. The particular rhythm of his footsteps that I had known since we were teenagers, slightly too fast always. He knocked twice and let himself in with a key he still had from the time she had asked him to water her plants during a work trip, and which she had apparently not asked back. He was carrying a paper bag with breakfast items and looked like someone who had been sleeping badly, and compensating with the kind of determined cheerfulness that required real effort to maintain. He looked good otherwise. No injuries I could see. He had made it off the mountain without the fall that had taken me, which I was grateful for in a way that was past the reach of words. He saw me immediately, stopped inside the door, and looked at me with the expression of a man encountering something he had not anticipated, and was filing rapidly. "Mia," he said, stopping just inside the doorway with the paper bag still in his hand and the expression of someone encountering an unexpected variable. "You got a dog." "He found me," Mia said from the kitchen, without turning around. "He showed up at the door at 5:40 in the morning. There's a difference between getting and being found." Derek looked at me. I looked at Derek. Something happened in the next 5 seconds that I did not fully understand at the time, but would think about for a long time afterward. His expression changed. Not dramatically. A small shift, like a word arriving at the tip of a tongue, and then retreating before it could be spoken. He blinked. He looked away. "What's his name?" Derek asked, setting the breakfast bag on the counter without taking his eyes off me the way a person doesn't take their eyes off something they're trying to identify. "Ghost," Mia said, and she said it the way she said things she had thought about, with a particular quality of intention, like the name had already become something real to her. Derek looked at me for another 3 seconds. Then he sat down at the kitchen table across from Mia and opened the breakfast bag and started taking things out in a focused, deliberate way. "Huh," he said, to the breakfast bag, to no one specifically. Just "huh," in the particular tone that means a person has encountered information they need to process privately before discussing it. We ate breakfast. Derek and Mia talked about her sister who had called twice this week, about the search team's latest update, which was not an update so much as a careful management of expectations. I ate from the bowl Mia had set up near the refrigerator and listened to everything, and understood things about grief that I had not understood Before it had a name I recognized on both sides. After breakfast, Derek washed the dishes and Mia went to change. And Derek and I were alone in the kitchen for about 90 seconds. He turned from the sink and looked at me. The careful look was back, the one from when he had walked in. He dried his hands on a dish towel slowly. "I don't know what you are," he said quietly, "but I've been having a feeling since I walked in here that I'm not going to say out loud because it's not something a person says out loud." He looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. He looked back at me. "Just take care of her, whatever you are. She's going to need someone who doesn't have anywhere else to be." He turned back to the sink. I sat on the kitchen floor and understood that Derek Walsh, who had known me since we were 14, had arrived at a conclusion I had not expected anyone to reach. Living inside her space with a sensing fully active was something I had to learn to manage carefully. The depth of it I had developed in Colton was a different thing inside an apartment. Outside, moving through towns and roads, the sensing read people in passing, snapshots, the quality of their current moment as they move through space. Inside, with the same person for hours and days, it built into something more complete, a continuous reading. The weight of Mia's grief was something I was in constant contact with. Not overwhelming. She was functioning. She was eating and working from home and answering messages and calling her mother on Tuesday evenings the way she always had. But underneath all of that, the grief was there, a persistent low-frequency thing, like a note held beneath everything else, and a piece of music felt more than heard. There were hours when it was heavier. Late afternoons, around 4, when the light changed and the apartment went quiet between her work calls and whatever came next in the evening. I learned to be nearby during those hours. Not close enough to intrude. Close enough that the sensing could tell me when the weight was becoming something she shouldn't carry alone. She had a habit of sitting on the floor of the living room during those hours. Not the couch, the floor, with her back against the couch and her knees up and a book she wasn't reading. I would come and sit beside her, and she would put her hand on my back, and we would sit there while the 4 o'clock light moved through the room and said whatever 4 o'clock light says. She talked sometimes about him, about Ethan, which I had to learn to hear the way you learn to hear your own name and a story someone else is telling, with a careful and necessary distance. She told me about the time he had tried to fix her kitchen faucet and made it significantly worse, and then spent for hours making it right because he could not leave a problem unfinished. She told me about a trip they had taken to the coast Octobers ago where it had rained the entire 3 days and they had spent most of it in a small bookshop eating sandwiches. She told me about the ring, that she had known about the ring for 2 months before he proposed because Derek had told her by accident and then sworn her to secrecy, which she had kept. I was going to pretend to be surprised, she said. I had practiced the face. Derek helped me practice the face. He felt terrible about spoiling it and wanted to help. She looked at the window. I never got to use the face. She said it lightly, almost like a joke. The sensing read it as the opposite of a joke. Sometimes people say the lightest thing about the heaviest thing. I put my head in her lap and she stroked my ears and talked and sometimes cried. The quiet kind that comes when crying has happened long enough that the process becomes almost calm. I could not tell her the thing I needed to tell her. I had no voice, no hands, no way to write a note or send a message or produce any evidence that would mean anything to anyone. I had only the sensing and the abilities and a presence that she said reminded her of someone, which was as close to the truth as the situation allowed. I held the truth in my chest where the compass needle had been, and I sat with her in the 4 o'clock light, and I waited for something I did not yet know I was waiting for. It happened on the 4th night, not dramatically, not with any flash or sound or visible sign, just a shift the way all the others had come, like a dial turning until something clear. I was lying on the folded blanket Mia had put in the corner of the living room for me, listening to her breathe in the bedroom, the sensing reading her as deeply asleep, and I became aware that I could shape something. Not words, not sound, something that existed in the space the sensing operated in, a projection outward instead of a reception inward. I tried to understand it by testing its edges carefully. The sensing received the weight and quality of other presences. This was the other direction, sending instead of receiving. Not emotions exactly, not language, more like the shape of a true thing, distilled down to its essential form, placed in the space between the presences the way you place an object on a table. I tested it on the most basic thing I knew. I shaped the essential form of I am here. Just that, the specific quality of presence saying I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and you are not alone. I sent it in the direction of the bedroom where Mia was sleeping. Carefully, slowly. The way you try something for the first time when you don't know what the result will be. Nothing happened for a long time. Then Mia shifted in her sleep, a small movement, and the sensing read something change in the quality of her rest, the weight of it lifting fractionally. Not fully awake, just less alone in the sleep. Like a room dark for a long time, where a small lamp turns on in the corner. Not enough to wake anyone, just enough to change the quality of the dark around them. I stayed very still and held the shape steady and breathed and let the night pass around it. In the morning when she woke, she came into the living room and looked at me and said, "I slept better last night than I have in 3 weeks." I don't know why. She looked at me with a particular expression she used when she was deciding whether to say the rest of something. "I dreamed about him," she said. "The good kind, not the kind where things go wrong at the end. Just him, being himself." She paused. "That hasn't happened since the mountain." I looked at her from the blanket. I held the ability very still inside me and understood something about what it was and what it was for and what it was going to take to use it the way it needed to be used. Derek came back on the 5th day with takeout and a look that said he had been thinking about the kitchen conversation since it happened and had arrived at a place he needed to speak from. Mia was on a work call in the bedroom. Derek sat on the living room floor with a takeout bag between us and looked at me with a direct look he used when he had decided to say the hard thing. "Okay," he said, "I'm going to say the thing I said I wasn't going to say out loud, because not saying it out loud is making me feel like I'm losing my mind." He looked at the photograph on the refrigerator that was visible through the kitchen doorway. He looked back at me. He took a breath. "You show up at her door the day after the search team found his phone at the base of the cliff. You have his eyes. Not like his eyes. I mean his actual eyes. The way they look at people. You found her from wherever you came from. You sit with her at 4 o'clock like you know what 4 o'clock means right now. When I walked in here, I felt something I have not felt since before the mountain." He paused. He was holding the takeout bag in both hands the way Mia held coffee cups, like it was the available anchor. I felt like my best friend was in the room. I looked at him. The sensing read him with complete clarity. No doubt, no performance. Just a man who had been on the mountain and had been carrying the weight of it the same way she had been carrying hers. "I am not a person who believes in this kind of thing," Derek said. "I want to put that on the record. I believe in things I can touch and measure. Ethan used to give me grief about it. He said I was the least mystical person he had ever met and that someday something was going to happen that my framework couldn't account for and I was going to have to sit with that. He said I was the least mystical person he had ever met and that someday something would happen my framework could not account for." He looked at me directly. I am currently sitting with that. I held his gaze. The 6th ability was there. The projection, the shape presence. I had used it on Mia in sleep, carefully, passively. This was different. Derek was awake and waiting. I shaped the most precise true thing I could manage. Not "I am here." Something more specific. Something that only meant anything to someone who knew me. The structural weight of an unfinished thing. The specific quality of a person who cannot leave a problem the way they found it. The 4 hours fixing a faucet. The 2 alarms and the 5 minutes early. The flannel shirt folded on a truck seat. I sent it across the living room floor toward a man who had known me since we were 14 years old and had been carrying the weight of a mountain for 3 weeks. Derek went very still. The sensing read something shift in him, large and sudden and completely real. His jaw tightened. He looked at the floor. He looked up at the ceiling. "Okay," he said. His voice had changed. The careful quality was gone. "Okay. I hear you." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a moment. "I don't know what this is. I don't know how this works. I don't know if you're going to be able to tell me that." He lowered his hands and looked at me, and there was nothing performed about it. "But I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad she let you in. And I'm not going to say anything to her until you figure out whether there's a way to say it yourself." He wiped his face quickly with the back of his hand. Straightened. When Mia came out of the bedroom 2 minutes later, Derek was unpacking the takeout with perfect composure, and she didn't notice anything. I watched him and understood something about Derek Walsh that I had always known and never had occasion to articulate. He had always been the person who held things together. He was still that person, even now. The man from the blue truck came back on the 7th day. I felt him before I could have explained how I felt him. The sensing picking up his specific quality of focus from outside the building. He was on foot this time, standing at the corner of Mia's street with a coffee cup, watching the building with the practiced patience of someone who was comfortable with long-term observation. I was on the couch, which I had been technically not supposed to be on since the 2nd day and which Mia had stopped enforcing by the 3rd. I got down and went to the window. The sensing read him clearly from here. The same controlled focus quality as before. But something new was present in it now that had not been there on the interchange. Information. He had information he hadn't had before. Something about this building or this address or Mia specifically. Not operational yet. Building. The kind of attention that precedes a decision. I did not know who he was. I did not know what he wanted. The world I had come back into had not given me a manual, and the sensing gave me quality, not content, weight, not words. What I knew was this. He had been here once, and I had stopped him, and he had left, and he had come back, which meant the first stop had not resolved whatever had brought him here. I went to find Mia. She was in the kitchen making tea, her back to the window, unaware. I sat behind her and made the sound I had been developing, not quite a bark, not quite a whine. A specific sound. A sound with a shape, the way the projection had a shape. A sound that meant pay attention, not to me, to the window, to the world outside the glass, to the space beyond the blue door. She turned and looked at me. What's wrong? She had learned in 7 days to read the difference between my sounds the way you learn to read a new language, by context and repetition and paying attention. I went to the window. I looked out. I looked back at her. She came to the window and looked out and scanned the street below with the automatic assessment of a person who lived alone in a city. She did not see him. He was around the corner, visible to the sensing but not to human eyes at this distance. She looked at me. What am I looking at? I held the projection outward, not toward her, toward the corner. The specific quality of the man's attention, the weight of it, the focused non-casual way it sat on this building. Mia looked at the corner, then back at me. Her brow moved in a way that meant she had not seen anything, but she had felt something and was deciding how to process it. You're telling me to be careful, she said. Not a question. She was reading me the way Derek had read me, the way Carl had read me, with the particular intelligence of people who paid real attention. She picked up her phone and called Derek. Can you come over tonight? A pause. Yes, I know it's a weeknight. Ghost is acting strange, and I'd feel better if someone else was here. I sat on the kitchen floor and listened to the call and noted that she had called the right person, without being told to, and done it without panic, and this was exactly who she was. Derek arrived at 6. I briefed him in the only way available to me, through the projection. The shape presence of the man's quality of attention, the weight of it, the direction it faced. Derek sat with that for a moment, his hands on his knees, his eyes closed, processing the information in whatever framework he had built. Since the living room floor conversation. Someone's watching the building, he said. Not to me, a dot to me. A confirmation, the way Derek confirmed things, by saying them out loud to give them a surface he could examine. Any idea what they want? He looked at me. I shaped the honest answer. I do not know the content, only the quality. He read that as accurately as he read everything now, okay. He called a friend from college who worked in building security. Professional, quiet about it. By 8, there was a second set of eyes on the block that the man in the blue truck would not think to account for. It was on the 8th night that the 5th ability arrived, and unlike the others, which had come as quiet incremental shifts, this one arrived as something I felt through my entire body at once. I was in the living room with Mia asleep and the sensing wide open. The man from the blue truck 3 blocks away, stationary, carrying the patience of someone who had decided to wait out a situation. And then something happened to the sensing itself. Like a dial that had been turning incrementally for 8 days, reaching a final position, and locking there with a sound I felt in my chest. The radius expanded. Not doubled, not tripled. The radius became something I did not have a unit of measurement for. It went out through the walls and the street and the buildings. I could feel the entire block, every living presence on it, every person in every apartment, the specific quality of their current moment, what they were carrying, what they were moving toward. I could feel Derek's friend to streets over, alert and professional, watching the corner with the patient attention of someone who had been told this mattered and had decided to believe it. I could feel the man from the blue truck 3 blocks away, sitting in his car now, the patience thinning, something shifting in the quality of his attention toward a decision. And I could feel something else, something I had not expected, something that had no equivalent in anything that had happened since the mountain. Deep beneath the street, beneath the asphalt and the pipes and the foundations, there was a presence, not a person, not an animal, something that had no shape I could describe in human terms. Old, the only word that fit. Old in a way that made mountains feel like recent arrivals. It was not aware of me, exactly, but it was not unaware of me either, and it was connected to the abilities. I could feel the connection clearly, the way you feel a thread between two objects when you hold one in each hand and pull gently. This was the source. Not an accident, not a random second chance. Something old had been watching the mountain that day. Something old had decided the fall was not the end. I stayed completely still in the living room while Mia slept, and felt the ancient presence beneath the city and understood that this was not over. Not in the sense I had thought it was not over. I had been operating on the assumption that finding Mia was the end of the story, that I had accomplished the thing, and now came the part where I figured out what to do with the accomplishment. The ancient presence beneath the city suggested something different, that finding Mia was not the end of the story, that finding Mia was where the actual story started. On the 9th morning, Mia found the ring, which was not the ring from the cliff, but which turned out to be something that mattered more than the ring from the cliff, in the ways that counted. Not my ring, not the one that had been in my jacket pocket at the bottom of a cliff, something she had been looking for on her own, for her own reasons, that had led her somewhere unexpected. She had been going through the box she kept on the top shelf of her closet, the one with the things she saved without a specific reason for saving them, and she had found a receipt, a jewelry store receipt for a gold band with a small diamond, dated 8 months ago, with his handwriting in the notes field where you could write the engraving instructions. No engraving. He had left the notes field blank, and she had never understood why until now. Sitting on the closet floor with the receipt in her hands, understanding everything at once. He had left it blank because he was going to ask her what she wanted engraved. He was always that way, never assumed, always asked. She sat on the closet floor for a long time. I sat in the doorway and watched her hold the receipt with both hands the way she held things that mattered, like the morning deserved it. He was going to ask me what I wanted it to say. She said, not to me, to the receipt, to the room, to whatever part of him was still present in the space where his things were. She looked at me then. The sensing read something that had not been present in the grief before, something new arriving in the weight of it, not replacing the grief but sitting beside it. Clarity. That was the word. The specific quality of a person who has understood something fully for the first time after understanding it partially for a long time. I would have said put our initials, she told me, E&M. That's it. That's all I would have wanted. She looked at the receipt again, simple. He would have liked that. She was quiet for a while. Then she stood up and put the receipt carefully back in the box and put the box back on the shelf and came out of the closet and looked at me in the doorway. I'm glad you're here, Ghost, she said. I don't know where you came from or what you are exactly or why you showed up at my door that morning, but I'm glad you did. She walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on, and I followed her and sat on the kitchen floor while the kettle heated and the morning did what mornings do in apartments with blue doors. I thought about the engraving, E&M. That's all I would have wanted. The simplest version of us, reduced to 2 letters, which was somehow the most complete description of anything I had ever heard. I thought about the ancient presence beneath the city and the connection to the abilities, and the sense that finding her was not the end of the story, but the beginning of the part. That mattered. I thought about Derek saying I am currently sitting with that, about Carl saying go find whoever you're looking for, about Sophie naming me Ghost because I had shown up out of nowhere. I thought about Roy's flannel shirt and 47 missed calls and the culvert under the farm road, and the bench in Colton and the 3 miles of perfect vision and the cuts that healed. All of it had been pointing here, to this kitchen, to this woman making tea, to this specific morning that was just an ordinary morning with a blue door and a lavender pot and a dog on the floor. That was the thing I had been trying to get back to. Not the dramatic version. This. The undramatic, unremarkable, completely irreplaceable version of a life with someone you could not do without. The man from the blue truck made his move on the 10th day, which was a Saturday, which was when Mia was home all day and Derek was not coming until the afternoon. I felt him mobilize at 8 in the morning, the quality of his attention shifting from the patient observation mode to something with a different shape entirely. The ancient presence beneath the city shifted to a small movement, the way a large thing moves when something small but significant happens in the space. It has been watching. He was not alone this time. 2 more presences with him, both with the same trained calm quality, moving from different directions toward the building, a coordinated approach. I ran the situation. Mia in the shower, unaware. 3 people from 3 directions. Derek 40 minutes out. 1 dog with 4 abilities and a 5th still finding its full shape. 1 obstacle and 1 gate had worked once when he was alone and unprepared. 3 coordinated people from 3 directions was a different problem, and it needed a different answer entirely. He was ready now. He had seen me and assessed me and come back with 2 people and a coordinated approach, which meant the obstacle strategy was not going to be sufficient this time. I needed something different. I needed to use what I had in a way that fit this specific situation rather than the general template I had been applying. The sensing was reading all 3 of them clearly. The projection could reach all 3 of them. The ancient presence beneath this city was present and connected, and whatever it was connected to was available. I went to the window. I looked out. I let the sensing expand to the full new radius, and I found all 3 of them, and I held all 3 in the awareness simultaneously. And then I sent the projection outward, not toward any one of them, but toward all 3 at once. In a direction I had not tried before, not the shape presence of a true thing but something older. The essential quality of the ancient thing beneath the city. The weight of something that had been here before roads, before buildings, before the street that their feet were currently walking on. The quality of something that had decided, for reasons of its own, that predated any of their plans, that this building and this person inside it were under a different kind of protection. All 3 of them stopped. Not dramatically, not falling, just stopping cold, the way you stop when your foot finds a stair that was not there and the floor arrives somewhere you did not expect it to be. 3 people on 3 different blocks felt the same thing at once. Each made the same fast calculation that experienced people make when a cost appears that was not in the original accounting. One of them left immediately, walking fast back the way he had come. The second stood for 30 seconds and then followed. The first one, the man from the blue truck, stood the longest. I held the projection steady and let the ancient quality of it sit in the space around him, and breathed and waited. He left, not running. The controlled, unhurried departure of someone who has revised their plan and is already building the next version. He left, but he would think about this. I held the projection for another 2 minutes after all 3 were gone. Then I let it go and stood at the window, while the Saturday morning moved peacefully through the street as if nothing had happened. Mia came out of the shower and made coffee and asked if I wanted to go for a walk, and I said yes in the only way available to me, which she had learned to read correctly by now. She took me to the park with the fountain, the one in the center of Colton where I had sat with a girl who was carrying her grief like a stone, except this was Kestwick. Different part. Mia walked at the pace of someone with nowhere specific to be, which was her Saturday pace, the one I had always liked best because it meant the day was ours. She had her hands in her coat pockets and she looked at things as she passed them, the way she always had. The small deliberate attention she gave to ordinary objects and ordinary moments. A child feeding ducks at the pond. She slowed and watched. An elderly man on a bench reading a book so thick it looked like a structural element. She smiled at that. The lavender outside a cafe that had been put in pots along the front wall for the season. She stopped and touched a sprig of it and smelled her fingers and went still for a moment. I sat beside her and felt the sensing reading her response to the lavender, and understood that the lavender pot outside her kitchen window was not incidental to anything. Ethan had put it there. 3rd spring they had been together. He had arrived with a pot of lavender for the window ledge because she had mentioned once, in passing, that she liked the smell. She had never told him that the pot was still there. She had just kept watering it every November, every year, through every winter, because it was the kind of thing you didn't let die if you could help it. I sat beside her at the cafe and felt her hold the sprig of lavender and feel whatever she was feeling, and I held the projection gently outward, the shape of I am here. Nothing more. She looked down at me. The sensing read something moving in her. Not grief exactly. Not the grief weight of the apartment. Something different. Something that had the quality of arriving. I have been thinking, she said to me in the park on a Saturday in October. The way she said things she was not certain about yet, testing their weight in the air before committing. I have been thinking that maybe the point isn't to stop missing him. Maybe the point is to carry it and keep going. Those aren't the same thing, and I confused them for a while. She looked at the lavender in her fingers. He would not have wanted me to stop. He was very specifically not a person who wanted anyone to stop on his account. I looked at her with everything I had. All the abilities and all the miles and all the distance between the mountain and this park bench. And I held the projection steady and let her have it. She took a breath long, the kind of breath that comes at the end of something, when the thing has been long enough and the air has been held long enough, and the body needs to let it go. Okay, she said, to herself, or to me, or to whoever she was addressing when she said things that mattered. Okay, I think I'm going to be okay. Eventually, she stood up and put the lavender sprig in her coat pocket and looked at me. And there was something in her face that had not been there on the first morning. Something that had the shape of beginning. Come on, Ghost, she said. with a warmth I had been walking toward for 6 days and 230 miles. And it felt exactly the way I had known it would feel when I finally got here. That night, the ancient presence beneath the city was closer than it had been. Not physically, but in the sensing it had a different texture, a proximity that had not been there before. I lay on my blanket in the living room and extended the sensing as far as it would go, and let the old thing find whatever it was looking for in the space I was holding open. It was not communication in any language. There were no words. It was the same kind of exchange as the projection, but from the opposite direction, and at a completely different scale. The shape of what it said was large and took a long time to arrive, and when it settled, I held it and tried to understand what it was asking or saying or deciding. It was showing me something, not a vision, not a memory, the shape of a condition, a thing that was true about my situation that I had not yet fully understood. The abilities had not arrived randomly. The strength after a threshold, the sensing after connection, the projection after grief, the fifth after encountering the ancient thing directly. Each ability had come in response to something I had done. Not done in order to get the ability, done because the situation required it. The ability had followed the action, not preceded it. And the ancient thing was showing me that there was one more. Not the fifth, which I now had. One more beyond the five. The sixth, which was different from all the others in one specific way. The others I had been given, not or built, or earned, depending on how you looked at the process. The sixth was not something I would be given or build or earn. The sixth was something I had to choose, consciously, with full knowledge of what the choice meant and what it cost and what it changed and whether I could live with all of that. I lay in the living room and breathed and felt the ancient presence hold the shape of the choice, steady in the space between us while the city went about its night outside the window. In the morning, I would think about what the choice was and what it meant. Right now, I lay in the dark and listened to Mia breathing in the next room and felt the weight of the choosing coming. It was not frightening. That was the thing I kept returning to. It should have been frightening, and it was not, which told me something about what I had become across 130 miles. Whatever the choice was, I had already been moving toward it since the mountain. Every mile, every ride, every ability, every person, every morning in someone's kitchen with borrowed food and borrowed warmth. All of it pointed at a moment I was going to have to step into with both feet and no guarantee about what was waiting on the other side, which was, I realized, exactly how I had always lived. Type the choice in the comments if you want to know what the sixth ability costs, and type both ways if you think there is a version where Ethan gets to keep everything. Part 4 is the finale. I have been a dog for 13 days. 13 days since the mountain, since the fall, since everything I had been got folded into something smaller and closer to the ground. I had covered 130 miles. I had unlocked 5 abilities. I had found her. I had kept her safe. I had sat with her in the 4 o'clock light and held the truth in my chest. And now there was a 6th ability waiting. One I had to choose. The ancient presence beneath the city had made that clear in a way that left no room for misreading. I did not yet know exactly what the choice was. I knew it was large. I knew it was the kind that reorganizes everything around it once made and cannot be unmade afterward. I knew it had something to do with the distance between what I was and what I had been. Between Ghost on Mia's blanket and Ethan Cole, structural engineer, the man she was still waiting for. I knew, in the way I had come to know things since the mountain, that the answer was already inside me. The ancient thing had not given me a choice I didn't already know how to make. It had just made sure I understood the weight of it before I made it, which was more honest than most situations in either of my lives had managed to be. The morning of the 14th day arrived the way important mornings always arrive, quietly and without announcement, looking exactly like every other morning until you were already inside it. Mia made coffee. She had started making 2 cups by the 5th day, one for herself and one she set on the counter and let go cold, which I had chosen not to examine too closely. She sat at the kitchen table with a newspaper, not the unread stack, a new one, today's, which she had gone out to get from the corner box for the first time in 3 weeks. That detail landed in me the way small details land when they mean something larger. She had gone out to get the newspaper. She was reading it. She was in the morning again. Derek called at 8:15. I could hear his voice clearly through the phone, the way I had always heard Derek through any phone, because he talked like he was presenting to a room. They talked about a memorial, not the funeral, which had happened 2 weeks ago. Something smaller, for the people who needed a place to put the feeling outside their own chest. I think it would help Derek said. Not to close anything, just to have somewhere specific to go with it for a minute. A place instead of just the inside of your head. Mia was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Saturday. The lake. She said the lake the way you say a place that has more than one thing attached to it now. After the call, she sat with her coffee and looked at the window. The lavender pot was still there, surviving another week without any sign of agreeing to stop. Saturday, she said to the window, or to the room, or to whatever she had been talking to in the quiet moments since the mountain. We'll go to the lake on Saturday. I sat on the kitchen floor and listened to the way she said we and felt something in my chest turn over slowly like a page at the end of a chapter that had been a long time coming. Derek showed up at 10 without calling, which was unusual enough that Mia raised an eyebrow when she opened the door. And he came in with a slightly too casual energy of someone with something to say. He sat at the kitchen table and accepted the coffee Mia put in front of him, and waited until she sat too, and then he looked at me in the corner and back at her. I need to tell you something, he said. Let me get through the whole thing before you respond, because the beginning of it is going to sound like I've lost my mind entirely. Mia looked at him over her cup. I let a dog I'd never met in through my door at 5:40 in the morning because it felt right. My bar for unusual is currently very high. Derek looked at me. I held his gaze and waited. We had discussed this on the living room floor. He had said he would not speak until I found a way to say it myself. But 13 days had passed, and the choice was coming, and Derek Walsh had apparently decided that waiting for me to find a way was not a plan he could continue to maintain. I think Ghost is Ethan, he said flat direct. The way Derek said hard things without decorating them, because decoration was what made hard things harder in his experience. The kitchen went very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a sentence lands in a room and takes up all the available space and nothing else can fit alongside it. Mia set her coffee cup down. She looked at Derek. She looked at me. She looked at Derek again. The sensing read something moving in her too large and too fast to hold clearly. She said his name once. Just his name. Like a question that was also already the answer. Like a person testing whether the word still had the same weight it had always carried. He told her everything. The walk-in moment, the eyes, the 4 o'clock sitting, the kitchen conversation, the living room floor, the projection he could only describe as Ethan in the room. He told her about the moment I had sent him the shaped truth of who I was. The structural weight of someone who could not leave a problem the way he found it, the 2 alarms. He told her about the mountain, about the second before the path gave way, about reaching back and the branch that wasn't there, and the sound he had been hearing every night since. He talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Mia listened to all of it with the quality of attention she brought to things that mattered, which was complete and without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Not the stunned quiet, the considering kind. The kind she used when examining something from multiple angles before committing. He always said you were the least mystical person he knew, she said. Something in how she said it carried a specific tender precision, like a fact she had always found quietly funny. I am, Derek said. I am deeply and specifically not a mystical person. I am telling you this anyway, which should indicate how thoroughly convinced I currently am. Mia looked at me. I looked at her. The sensing was reading everything, and I held it all and waited and did not look away from her face. Ghost, she said. Different from every other time, she had said it lower, more careful, testing whether it was the right word or whether the right word was a different one entirely. I did not move. I did not bark. I did not do any of the things a dog might do when its name was called. I just looked at her with all 5 abilities steady and present and aimed at her face. She pressed her hand over her mouth, just once, just briefly. Then she lowered it and looked at me with the eyes I had remembered across 130 miles. Ethan, she said. Not a question, not a verdict, just a name, said by the only person whose voice made it sound like what it actually was. I walked across the kitchen to her slowly, the way you move towards something you have been moving toward for a long time and are finally close enough to reach. I put my head in both her hands and held still and let the projection go outward toward her fully and without holding anything back, all of it, everything I had been carrying. The ring in the jacket pocket, the 47 calls, the culvert and Sophie and Carl and Roy's flannel shirt, every mile of 230, the texture of each one, and underneath all of it, the thing that had been there since before the abilities and before the mountain and before any of this. Just her. The specific irreplaceable fact of her. Mia made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not crying exactly. Something past crying. From deeper than wherever crying comes from. a sound with no performance in it at all. She put her arms around me and pressed her face into the side of my neck, and I felt the sensing receive the full weight of 13 days of waiting and miles and purpose landing at once. Derek was still at the kitchen table. The sensing read him clearly, not intruding, holding the room together the way he always held things together, quietly and without being asked. We stayed like that for a long time. The coffee went cold. The lavender pot sat outside the window. The newspaper lay open on the table at a story about something that was not this. Eventually, Mia lifted her head and looked at me with the face of someone who has been carrying something at full weight for a long time and has just been permitted to set it down. "What do you need?" she asked me directly, practically, the way she approached every problem, without ceremony, with the full weight of her attention aimed at it. That night, the ancient presence came closer than it had ever been. Not beneath the city this time. In the apartment, in the living room, present and large and fully attentive. Mia felt it. The sensing read her wake in the bedroom and lie still and breathe carefully, the way people breathe when they feel something they cannot name but recognize as significant. She did not come out. She lay still and let the presence do what it had come to do, which was the correct response and which told me what I had always known about her capacity for courage. The ancient thing did not waste time. It brought the shape of the choice directly, fully formed, no ambiguity, no softening. The complete and honest terms of what was offered and what it cost. Option 1. Stay as I was. Ghost. The dog on Mia's blanket, with 5 abilities and the ancient thing's protection, present in her life in this form for as long as this form lasted. Meaningful. Real. Not nothing. She knew who I was. Derek knew. The projection meant I could communicate imperfectly, but genuinely, and I could protect her from the blue truck. But not human. Not ever again human under this option. Not Sunday mornings in the way they had been. Not the lake wedding. Not his voice or his hands or the face in the photograph. Option 2. A return. Not a guarantee. Not a certainty. A possibility. The ancient thing was honest about that. A thread between what I was and what I had been, pulled hard enough to cross. The cost was specific. The 5 abilities would not survive the crossing. Everything accumulated across 130 miles. Every level of what I had become, offered as the price. Gone. Not dormant. Gone completely. The crossing required everything I had accumulated. The SSS-Rank that had been building since the mountain, all of it, as the toll for the passage back. And there was a third cost the ancient thing did not soften. The crossing had been done before, and other times. It had not always worked. That was the full and honest truth of option 2. I lay in the living room with the ancient presence around me and held both options with equal weight, and did not rush toward either of them, because the choice deserved full consideration. I thought about the 5 abilities, the vision on the mountain, the healing on the road shoulder, the sensing that had let me read Mia's grief and reach Derek and stop the blue truck, the strength that had moved the branch, the projection that had let me tell the truth to the people who needed to hear it, each one used exactly as it needed to be used. These things had accumulated across 130 miles of people who had stopped when they didn't have to. Giving them up was not nothing. I did not pretend it was nothing. I thought about the man from the blue truck, about the 3 people on 3 blocks who had felt the ancient projection and turned around. Without the abilities, that protection was gone. That was a real cost. The kind that had weight and shape and consequence that couldn't be reasoned away or set aside as theoretical. Real, something that genuinely mattered. And then I thought about what Mia had asked me. What do you need? Tell me what you need and I'll find a way. She had meant it completely, and she always meant exactly what she said. I thought about what she actually needed, not what grief had made her think she needed. What she actually needed, which the sensing had been reading with complete clarity for 13 days. She needed him back, not a dog on her blanket who could project shape truths and read her presence. Him. Ethan. The specific and irreplaceable person the photograph still held. The Sunday mornings, the faucet fixed over for hours. The lake wedding still waiting with a venue and a date and a dress and a ring and only one missing component to make it real. She had said she was going to be okay. She had meant it. She was strong enough to carry the grief and keep going. But strong enough to carry it was not the same as not having to. And he was not willing, given the choice, to let her carry it when there was another option available. That was the whole of the decision, and it had always been that simple. He made the decision the way he had made every decision since the mountain. By looking at what was true and moving in the direction the truth pointed without decoration or delay. The 5 abilities had been given for a reason, not to keep. To use. Every one of them had been used exactly as it needed to be, for the people it needed to be used for at the right time. The vision had let him see the road. The healing had kept him moving. The sensing had let him sit with grief and read threats and reach Derek. The strength had moved what needed moving. The projection had done the most important work. It had let him tell the truth to the people who needed it. And now it was going to do one final thing before all of it went. He went to the bedroom door and sat in the doorway and looked at Mia lying still in the dark, eyes open, waiting. The ancient presence was behind him, patient and present. He sent the projection toward her one last time. Everything, the full weight of the choice. What it meant, what the cost was. What was on the other side of the cost if it worked. Not asking permission. She did not get a vote in whether he tried, but she deserved to know what was happening, and she deserved to feel the full weight of why it was happening. She lay still for a long time, the sensing read the reception of it moving through her, a person receiving something too large to process quickly and choosing not to try to rush it. Then she sat up. She looked at the doorway. The room was dark, but the sensing made dark irrelevant, and he could see her face as clearly as he had seen the red truck from 3 miles. "Don't," she said. Her voice was steady. "Don't do it for me. Don't do it because you think I need you to. I told you I was going to be okay. I meant that completely." He looked at her. He held the projection steady and let the answer come through it without decoration because she deserved the honest version and nothing less. "Not I am doing this for you. I am doing this because it is true that I am not finished. To lives and not finished. The mountain did not finish me, and I am not willing to let this form finish me either." "Is it dangerous?" she asked directly, looking at the doorway and the presence she could feel but not see, with the specific courage of someone who had decided to ask the hardest question first. He held the honest answer and sent it through without softening. "Yes. Not certainly, but yes." That was the full and honest truth of it, and she deserved the full and honest truth. She pressed her lips together. Then she got up and came to the doorway and sat on the floor beside him and put her hand on his back. "Whatever you are," she said to the ancient presence in the living room, with the direct quality Mia brought to everything that deserved directness. "You brought him back once. I'm asking again." The ancient presence did not respond in any measurable way, but the sensing read something shift in it, a quality of attention that had not been there before. Focused and fully decided, it started quietly. The way all the significant things into lives had started, not with noise or light, but with a shift in what was present, something arriving that had not been there. The 5 abilities began to move, not painfully, more like something settling into its final resting place after a long journey, each one finding the position it had always been heading toward. The vision went first, the 3-mile clarity, the red truck, the license plate. He felt it leave the way you feel a held breath finally released, completely and all at once. The healing went next. The cuts on the road shoulder sealing themselves, the cold on the mountain the body had learned to handle, all of it offering itself up to the thread being pulled. The sensing was the hardest. 13 days of reading Mia's presence, the weight of her grief, the specific quality of her attention, the sound of her breathing to rooms away. He held it for a moment longer than the others. One last full reading of the room, her hand on his back, warm and steady and certain. Derek in the living room, awake, holding things together, the lavender pot outside the window, surviving, the coffee going cold on the counter, the newspaper open on the table, the blue door in the courtyard, waiting for its coat of paint. Then he let the sensing go, and the strength, and finally the projection. Last, the one that had done the most work, the shaped truth sent across a living room floor to his best friend. All 5 offered up to the thread the ancient thing was pulling taut between what he was and what he had been, between the dog on the blanket and the man on the mountain. The thread pulled. The ancient presence brought its full weight to bear, and he felt the scale of it properly for the first time. The full age of something that had been here before cities. The world went sideways. Not like the fall. Sideways the way dreams go sideways, where the logic of the previous scene dissolves and something else assembles itself in its place. He was not in the apartment, not on the mountain, in a space with no coordinates, in a form with no edges, and the thread was the only thing in it with any substance at all. He held the thread through every piece of it, through the full weight of everything the crossing chose to show him, through the mountain and all the miles and all the people, and he did not let go. The first thing was cold, the cold of a floor, hard and present and real, which was information about the world he had not had access to in this form since the mountain and the fall. The second thing was weight, the particular weight of a body that had 2 arms and 2 legs and a face that belonged to a person who had a name other than Ghost. The third thing was Mia's voice. Very close. Saying his name. The real one. With the specific quality of someone saying a word they were not certain was going to be answered. He opened his eyes. The apartment. The bedroom doorway. The living room floor. On his back, looking up at the ceiling with its small water stain in the northwest corner. Mia was on the floor beside him, both hands on his face, her face above his with an expression he did not have adequate words for and did not need adequate words for. "Hi," he said. The voice came out rough, unused, like something that had been stored somewhere without enough air. But it came out. It was his. It worked. Mia made the sound again, the one from the kitchen that was past crying, that came from deeper than wherever crying comes from, a sound with no performance in it at all. He put his arms around her. To arms. The specific weight and warmth of a person holding another person, which is a technology so old and so perfect that nothing has ever improved on it. Derek was in the doorway. He could not feel him with the sensing because the sensing was gone, but he could see him with regular human eyes that had regular human range. Derek was not crying. He had both hands pressed against his mouth and his eyes were very bright, and he was absolutely, definitively, completely not crying in any way. "Hey," he said to Derek over Mia's shoulder, with the rough, unused voice of someone glad to find it still worked after 2 weeks of not being in a position to use it. Derek took his hands away from his mouth. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back. "You are the most inconvenient person I have ever known in my entire life," he said. "I know," he said. "I have been aware of that about myself for some time, and I accept full responsibility for the inconvenience it has caused everyone involved over the years." 3 weeks, Derek said. 3 weeks, and you come back as a dog and walked 100 miles and unlock superpowers like it's a normal response to the situation. 230, he said. "The 30 matters." The 30 was a culvert and a fuel depot and a man named Roy who gave me a flannel shirt at 3 in the morning. Derek laughed. It came out of him like something that had been under pressure for 3 weeks and had finally found the exit. And once it started, it did not stop quickly. He slid down the door frame until he was sitting on the floor and laughed until it stopped being laughter and became something else, and he sat there breathing with bright eyes. Mia pulled back and looked at his face. Her hands were still on both sides of it. She was looking at him with the inventory quality of someone examining a thing they thought they had lost. "You're cold," she said. Practical. Direct. The first thing she always did with a problem was identify the most immediate version of it and address that version first. "In a minute," he said. "I have been working toward this moment for 2 weeks and 230 miles, and I would like a minute with it before we move on to the practical things." She understood. She sat back and kept her hands on his face and let the minute happen, which was the most Mia thing she had ever done and which he intended to tell her at length eventually. The next hours were the practical kind. Derek called someone who knew someone who could handle the question of a missing person reappearing in his girlfriend's apartment without documentation. This was more solvable than it sounded. Derek handled it with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for a task that fit his specific skill set and was now deploying it fully. He sat on the couch under 3 blankets with coffee Mia had made, the real kind, not the cold cup on the counter, and he was warm in a way that had nothing to do with blankets. The abilities were gone. He had known they would be, and he had made peace with that on the living room floor before the crossing, and he held to that peace now, examining it for regrets. The vision was gone. He could see the apartment with regular human eyes that topped out at the distance. A regular human could see, which was sufficient for most purposes in ordinary life. The healing was gone. His hands were slightly rougher than he remembered, and there was a scar on his left palm that had not been there before the mountain, which needed a story. The sensing was gone. He could not feel the weight of Mia's presence from across a room or read the quality of her current moment or know without asking what she was carrying. That was the strangest absence. 13 days of constant clear reading of another person, and now he had to do what humans do, which was look at faces and listen and ask and guess. It was, he reflected, probably better for any relationship that he not be able to feel the exact weight of another person's every moment. He decided to count it as a net positive. The projection was gone. He had to use words, which were slower and less precise and required a working voice and the willingness to be heard by someone who might not be ready. He had a working voice. He was willing to be heard. He was sitting on Mia's couch under 3 blankets with coffee and Derek in the kitchen, handling the administrative side of his return. The strength was gone. He was exactly as strong as Ethan Cole had been before the mountain, which was adequately strong for a structural engineer who helped friends move furniture. None of the abilities were gone in the way that felt like loss. They had done what they were for, every single one, and then they had gone towards something larger than themselves. He thought about Carl's kitchen, Sophie's quilt, Roy's flannel shirt, Pete the roofer, and Diana with her audiobook, and Barbara the teacher with the dog biscuits in her glove compartment. All of them had given something. None of them had known what they were giving it to. They had just stopped or opened a door or shared a sandwich, and the rest had followed from that. The abilities had accumulated in response to connection, not to combat, not to power, not to anything that could be planned or extracted from a system. Just people deciding to be the help. It had mattered. Every single stop onto 130 miles had mattered in ways none of them could have known, and in ways he would spend a long time figuring out how to account for. The man from the blue truck was not finished. The ancient presence had protected the apartment twice, but the ancient presence had also made a crossing, and the thread was thinner now. Derek found out on the second morning who he was through the friend from college in building security who had been doing his own quiet work throughout the previous 2 weeks. He was not a criminal in any recognizable sense. A person who had been looking for something in Mia's possession that she did not know she possessed, which made the situation specific. Something of Effen's, something from before the mountain, connected to a project that had not resolved cleanly and had left a thread pointing toward people who did not want threads. Derek handled it with a phone call, and then a meeting, and then a second phone call, using the social intelligence of a man who understood that most problems were people problems. The man in the blue truck did not come back. Ethan could not verify this directly without the sensing, but Derek said he was satisfied, and Derek had a good record on satisfaction. Mia never knew the full shape of it. She knew someone had been watching the building and that Derek had dealt with it, which was the version she chose to accept and which Ethan supported. She had carried enough for 3 weeks. There would be time later for full accounting. For now, the blue door was safe, and that was the version of the story that currently mattered most. Saturday came with the specific quality of October days that know they are beautiful and are doing it deliberately. Cold, clear, and the kind of blue sky that looks intentional. The lake was 40 minutes from Kestwick. Mia drove. Derek sat in the back and gave directions she did not need, which he was doing for the specific comfort of having something useful to do. Ethan sat in the passenger seat and looked at the road and thought about roads and the specific relationship he had recently developed with them, and how different this one felt with a seat. The lake was still. The kind of still that water gets in late autumn when the tourists are gone and the summer is completely finished and the lake is just being a lake without an audience. There was a bench near the water with a view of the far shore where the trees had gone fully orange and red, the whole thing looking like something painted to make a point about beauty. They sat on the bench, the three of them, and the lake was still, and the trees were the color, and the sky was that blue. And nobody said anything for a while because nothing needed to be said first. Derek spoke eventually. He said things about the mountain and about who Ethan had been to him since they were 14. The real version, not the eulogy version, the one with the arguments and the faucet. Mia laughed at the faucet story, a real laugh, the full one that started small and took over. Derek laughed too. Ethan sat between them and felt the laugh move through the air and land on the water. Then Mia said some things. She talked about the ring and the face she had practiced and never gotten to use. She talked about Sunday mornings. She talked about the lavender pot. He put it there 3 springs ago, she said. I mentioned once that I liked the smell. He showed up with a pot the next week and acted like it had always been on the window ledge. She looked at the lake. That was who he was. He paid attention. He remembered things. He did the quiet version of the thing instead of the version that people could see and notice. She looked at him. He looked back at her. The sensing was gone, and he was reading her face with regular human eyes and a regular human heart, and what he read required no special ability. I'm glad you're back, she said, with the full weight of what back meant after 3 weeks and 2 lives and 230 miles of road and cold and purpose and one choice. He took her hand, the specific warmth of 2 human hands in October beside a lake. No sensing needed, no projection. Just 2 people and a bench and the water and the fact of being here. I'm sorry it took me a while, he said. The mountain complicated the timeline somewhat. I got here as fast as the available resources allowed, which turned out to be faster than expected. She shook her head slowly. You got here, she said. You always get here. That is the one thing I have never once doubted about you, not for a single day in any of this. Derek looked at the lake and did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "For the record, I am never going hiking again. I want that on record officially. Never." Mia laughed. Ethan laughed. Derek pretended he was not also laughing. The sound of it went out across the still water and the orange and red trees and the sky that was its specific blue. And the lake received it the way lakes receive things, completely and without judgment, holding it in the still water for as long as it wanted to be held. 3 months later, they got married at the lake. Small ceremony. The original date had passed, which they had both decided to treat as a postponement rather than a cancellation. Derek was the best man. He gave a speech that was funny and then sincere, and then funny again, which was exactly the correct structure for a Derek Walsh speech, and which Mia had told him in advance. The ring had a simple gold band and a small diamond, and inside it were 2 letters engraved in the particular tilted script she used when she was writing something she meant completely. E&M, that's all. That's all she had wanted. She had said this in her kitchen with a receipt in her hands, not knowing he could hear her. He had the engraver do it the day the ring was sized. She cried when she saw it. The real kind, not the 4 o'clock kind. The full kind. When something lands exactly right after a long time of things not landing at all. The lavender pot was still on the window ledge when they got back from the honeymoon. It had survived, as it always survived, against all reasonable horticultural expectation. He watered it every morning after that, not because it needed daily watering, because some habits start for reasons that outlast the reasons and you keep them because the keeping matters. The sensing was gone. The projection was gone. The vision and the healing and the strength were gone. He was Ethan Cole, structural engineer, with a scar on his left palm and a working voice. He had no way to read the weight of what she was carrying on any given day. He had to ask. He had to listen. He had to pay attention the slow human way, which was also the oldest way. He paid attention. He was good at it. She had told him once, and he had not fully believed her at the time. He believed her now, and every ordinary morning that followed the lake. Sometimes at night, he thought about the ancient thing beneath the city, whether the thread was still there, thin as it was now, connecting something old to something that had used its gifts. He thought about Carl and Sophie and Roy and Frank and Barbara and Pete and Diana and the girl on the bench in Colton whose mother had died and who had sat beside the grief in the October air. He thought about the 47 missed calls on a cracked screen, the culvert under the farm road, the flannel shirt on the truck seat, the deer stepping out of Carl's tree line. He thought about Derek on the living room floor saying, "I am currently sitting with that," about Sophie naming him Ghost, about Carl saying, "Go find whoever you're looking for." And sometimes, on Sunday mornings, when Mia was burning the first pancake and pretending it was intentional and the newspaper was on the table and the coffee was bad and the lavender was outside, he thought that whatever the ancient thing had been trying to show him, whatever the point of 2 lives and 230 miles and 5 abilities given up, and 1 choice made in the dark, the point was this: the Sunday morning, the burned pancake, the bad coffee, the 2 letters on the inside of a gold band. The specific, ordinary, unremarkable, completely irreplaceable fact of all this. He had walked 230 miles to get back to an ordinary Sunday morning, and every single step, from the mountain to the blue door to here, had been exactly worth every one of them. That was the whole story. From the mountain to the blue door to an ordinary Sunday morning and an apartment with a lavender pot on the window ledge. That was all of it, and all of it was enough.